Hello, I am the Wizard of Tales, and I'm here to guide you today. I know this video is the perfect companion to help my dear dreamers relax and drift off to sleep. Before we dive into a world of calm and serenity, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and tell me where you're watching from and what time it is for you. Now, get cozy, take a deep breath, and let the magic of stories embrace you. In 19th century London, where the smoke from the chimneys danced against the grey sky and the cobbled streets echoed with the sounds of carriages, the Darling family lived in a modest but cozy house. Winnie Darling, a 12-year-old girl with bright eyes and an even brighter imagination, shared a room with her younger brothers. John, a 10-year-old who dreamed of pirate adventures, and Michael, the 6-year-old who still cuddled his teddy bear every night. Mrs. Darling was a loving mother who every night carefully stored her children's dreams in little imaginary drawers in their minds, while telling them stories before bed. Mr. Darling, although somewhat strict with finances and concerned with appearances, had a kind heart hidden beneath his austere exterior. The family also had Nana, a devoted Saint Bernard dog who served as the children's nanny, an unusual arrangement that often embarrassed Mr. Darling in front of the neighbors. One particularly starry night, while Mrs. Darling was putting the children to bed, she noticed a strange shadow dancing in the room. It was no ordinary shadow. It seemed to have a life of its own, and even more curiously, it didn't belong to anyone in the room. When she tried to catch it, it flew out of the window like a frightened bird. Mrs. Darling held this event close to her heart, worried about what it might mean. The stories Winnie told her brothers every night were full of pirates, fairies, and extraordinary adventures. She had a special gift for storytelling, transforming the children's rooms into pirate ships, enchanted forests, and mysterious caves through her words. John and Michael hummed on every word, their eyes wide with excitement as their imaginations flew to faraway, magical places. It was on one of these evenings, when their parents had gone out for an important dinner, that something extraordinary happened. A golden glow, no bigger than a butterfly, came through the bedroom window, followed by a boy dressed in leaves and vines. He floated in the air as if gravity were just a polite suggestion that he preferred to ignore. His name was Peter Pan, and he was looking for something. "My shadow," he exclaimed, scanning the corners of the room. "Have you seen her around?" Wendy, who was only pretending to sleep, sat up in bed amazed. The boy didn't look much older than her, but there was something in his eyes, a mixture of wild joy and ancient loneliness, that made him unlike anyone she had ever met. The little golden light that accompanied him was Tinker Bell, a fairy with a strong temper and even stronger jealousy. She tinkled furiously when she saw Peter's interest in Wendy, although only he seemed to understand her language of bells. When Wendy found the shadow tucked away in her mother's drawer and helped Peter sew it back on, after a few unsuccessful attempts by him to glue it on with soap, an instant friendship was formed. Peter told them about Neverland, a place where children never grew up, where there were adventures every day, and where he led a group of lost boys, children who had fallen out of their baby carriages and were never reclaimed. "Why don't you come with me?" Peter asked, hovering in the air with a mischievous grin. "You can tell stories to the lost boys, and your brothers can join in our adventures." The offer was tempting. Winnie looked at her brothers, who were already awake and excited at the possibility. The idea of never having to grow up, of living in a place where adventure was always lurking, was irresistible to children. But there were dangers in Neverland that Peter mentioned casually, as if they were part of the fun. Captain Hook and his pirates, who swore revenge on Peter after he cut off the captain's hand and threw it to a crocodile. The same crocodile that now followed Hook everywhere, having developed a particular taste for pirates and a ticking clock in his stomach. There were also the Indians from Tiger Lily's tribe, the mermaids with their enchanting voices and whimsical personalities, and the fairies who, as Tinker Bell clearly demonstrated, could be as temperamental as they were beautiful. "But how will we get there?" asked John, adjusting his glasses enthusiastically. "By flying, of course," replied Peter, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "All it takes is a happy thought and a little fairy dust." Tinker Bell, still annoyed, was persuaded to share her magic dust with the children. Soon, Wendy, John and Michael discovered that they could float, first clumsily, banging against the ceiling, then more gracefully as they learned to control their direction. The decision was made in a moment of pure childish magic and excitement. Worries about their parents, growing up, and the responsibilities of the adult world seemed distant and unimportant in the face of the promise of eternal adventure. As the children followed Peter out of the window, climbing higher and higher into London's night sky, they left behind not only their home, but also the ordered and predictable world of the Victorian era. Ahead of them was the second star on the right, shining like a beacon to Neverland, where time worked differently and adventure awaited around every corner. What they didn't know was that this impulsive decision would lead them to discoveries about themselves, the value of family, and the true meaning of growing up. Lessons none of them expected to learn when they left the comfort of their rooms that starry night. The journey to Neverland was an experience the darling children would never forget. Flying above the clouds, following Peter Pan through the starry sky, they discovered a completely new world. The air became thinner and shinier as they approached the second star on the right, and a magical sensation overtook their bodies. Michael clutched his teddy bear tightly as he flew, occasionally letting out squeals of delight as he plunged through the soft clouds. John maintained a posture that tried to look serious, like an explorer on an important expedition, but his eyes sparkled with excitement at each new discovery. Wendy, for her part, watched Peter with fascination, noticing how he seemed perfectly at ease in the air, as if he had been born to fly. Tinker Bell continued to show her displeasure, flying ahead of the group and occasionally casting annoyed glances at Wendy. Her golden glow flashed more brightly when Peter approached her to help her with some stronger air currents. "It's just over there," announced Peter, pointing to a bright spot on the horizon. As they got closer, Neverland began to take shape before their amazed eyes. It was an island that seemed to have been plucked straight out of children's most fantastic dreams. Snow-capped mountains on one side, golden beaches on the other, a dense rainforest in the center, and a crystal-clear lagoon where mermaids swam lazily. Anchored in a cove was Captain Hook's imposing pirate ship, the Jolly Roger, its black sails fluttering ominously in the wind. In the forest, smoke rose in spirals from the teepees of the indigenous tribe, and small points of light indicated where the fairies lived among the trees. Peter led the children to their secret hiding place, a hollow tree that served as the entrance to the Lost Boys' underground house. Before entering, however, they had to quickly hide behind some rocks. A group of pirates were patrolling the area. "That's Mr. Smee," whispered Peter, pointing to a short, pudgy pirate with round glasses. "He's Captain Hook's first mate. He's not very bright, but he's loyal to the captain." The pirates went on muttering about looking for Peter Pan and his new shadow, not realizing that the object of their search was only a few meters away, holding back their laughter along with their new friends. When the way was clear, Peter led them to the secret entrance. Each child went down a different natural slide, landing on soft cushions made of leaves and feathers. Inside the hideout, 6 boys of varying ages, all dressed in animal skins and makeshift clothes, welcomed the visitors with a mixture of curiosity and enthusiasm. "Lost Boys, meet Wendy, John, and Michael," announced Peter proudly. "Wendy will be our new mother, and she'll tell us stories every night." The Lost Boys, Lightly, Toodles, Nibs, Curly, and the twins, immediately surrounded Wendy with requests for stories and questions about what it was like to have a real mother. John was quickly embroiled in a discussion about pirate combat tactics, while Michael found a cozy corner to sit with his teddy bear, watching everything with wide eyes. The underground house was an extraordinary place, decorated with treasures found all over the island. Colorful mermaid shells, exotic feathers from birds never seen before, hand-drawn maps showing secret hiding places, and even some jewels borrowed from the pirates. Wendy, naturally taking on the maternal role that Peter had assigned her, began to organize things. She noticed that the boys needed a bath, their clothes needed mending, and the place needed a good clean. But before she could begin any of these tasks, a distant sound caught everyone's attention. Tick-tick, the Lost Boys were instantly on alert. "It's the crocodile," explained Nibs in an excited whisper. It must be chasing Captain Hook again. Peter flew to one of the secret windows of the hideout and confirmed it. The fearsome Captain Hook was running along the beach, his red coat fluttering in the wind, while the huge crocodile chased him with a hungry expression. The sound of the clock in his stomach echoed around the island, serving as a constant warning to the captain. "Why don't we take advantage of him being distracted to explore the ship?" suggested Peter with a mischievous grin. The idea was met with shouts of approval from the Lost Boys and a worried look from Wendy. "Isn't it dangerous?" she asked, thinking of her younger brothers. "Everything's an adventure in Neverland," replied Peter, already floating towards the exit. "Besides, you still have a lot of fairy dust on you. If anything goes wrong, you can just fly away." And so, before Wendy could protest further, the whole group was on their way to the Jolly Roger, flying low over the waters of the Mermaid Lagoon. The aquatic creatures raised their heads to watch them pass, their colorful hair glistening in the sun, but there was something about their smiles that made Wendy shudder. They didn't look entirely friendly. As they approached the pirate ship, the sun began to set on Neverland, painting the sky with impossible colors and casting long shadows over the water. The adventure that awaited them was only the beginning of a series of events that would test not only their courage, but also the bonds they were beginning to form in this magical place, where time stood still and children never had to grow up, or so they thought. As they approached the Jolly Roger, Peter signaled for everyone to remain silent. The pirate ship was even more impressive up close, with its black sails and elaborate carvings in the dark wood. Most of the crew had left in search of the captain, leaving only a few sleepy pirates standing guard on deck. Peter, an expert at mischief, led the group to Captain Hook's cabin. The place was luxurious, decorated with maps, treasures, and an impressive collection of red coats. In the center was a table with a detailed map of Neverland, marked with mysterious X's and annotations in the captain's elaborate handwriting. "Look at this," whispered John, adjusting his glasses as he examined a golden compass on the table. Michael, for his part, was fascinated by a small globe that rotated magically, showing lands that didn't even exist on ordinary maps. When he noticed something different, a half-open diary on the captain's desk. Curious, she approached it and began to read a few passages. To her surprise, she discovered that Hook hadn't always been a cruel pirate. Years ago, he had been a respected explorer, transformed by bitterness after his fateful encounter with Peter Pan. Meanwhile, the Lost Boys rummaged through drawers and chests, finding all kinds of treasure. Tinker Bell flew around, her golden light illuminating dark corners of the cabin, although she still cast suspicious glances at Wendy. Suddenly, they heard voices approaching. "The captain's coming back," warned Curly, one of the Lost Boys, his eyes wide with fear. "Quick, hide," ordered Peter, as the children looked for places to hide. Wendy, John, and Michael hid behind a heavy curtain, while the Lost Boys squeezed inside an empty truck. Peter floated up to the ceiling, blending into the shadows, and Tinker Bell hid inside a lantern. Captain Hook entered his cabin, panting and irritated after yet another crocodile chase. His long black hair was disheveled, and his metal hook glinted menacingly in the light of the lanterns. Mr. Smee followed him closely, trying to calm him down. "That damned reptile," shouted Hook, throwing his hat on the table. "And all because of that pestilent Peter Pan. Oh, if I could only get my hand on him." "Calm down, Captain," tried Smee, pouring himself a cup of tea. "You need some rest, sir. How about some music on your harpsichord?" Hook sat down heavily in his chair, but something caught his eye. "Smee," he said slowly, "did you go through my things?" Winnie's heart raced. The compass that John had examined was out of place, and some drawers weren't completely closed. "No, Captain, don't even go near your things, not me," replied Smee, confused. Hook stood up, his shrewd eyes scanning the cabin. "So we have visitors," he muttered, a cruel smile forming on his lips. "And I bet I know exactly who they are." The captain began to walk around the cabin, banging his hook against furniture and walls. As he approached the curtain where Wendy and her brothers were hiding, Michael couldn't hold back a sneeze. "Whoa!" exclaimed Hook, pulling back the curtain. At that moment, Peter Pan descended from the ceiling like a bolt of lightning, kicking off the captain's head. "Now," he shouted, and chaos ensued in the cabin. The lost boys jumped out of the trunk, throwing objects and making a mess. Tinkerbell flew in circles around Smee's head, disorientating him. Wendy, John, and Michael took advantage of the distraction to run to the cabin window. "Happy thought," reminded Peter, as he threw more fairy dust at them. The children began to float away, escaping through the window one by one. Hook, furious, tried to reach them with his hook. "Come back here, you little pests." "Smee, call the crew." Peter was the last to leave, but not without one last taunt. He took the captain's favorite hat and placed it on his own head, bowing mockingly. "See you later, old man," he laughed, flying out the window. The escape was exciting, with the children flying in zigzags to dodge the shots of the pirates who had climbed onto the deck. The cannonballs exploded in the water around them, creating big splashes that got them wet, but nobody cared. They were all laughing at the adventure. When they finally reached their hiding place, they fell to the ground laughing and panting. John was still holding the compass he had borrowed from the captain, and Michael was hugging his teddy bear that had almost been left behind in the confusion. "That was incredible," exclaimed Nibs, jumping up and down with excitement. Wendy, although she also found the adventure exciting, couldn't stop thinking about the captain's diary. There was more to Huck than met the eye, and she wondered if Peter knew the whole story. Night fell in Neverland, and the children gathered around a makeshift fire inside the hideout. Wendy began to tell stories, but this time she included one about a man who had lost his way and turned into something he had never planned to be. Peter watched from his special chair, made of intertwined branches, but his gaze was distant, as if he too was lost in thought about the past, or perhaps about the future he refused to have. The sound of the crocodile's clock echoed in the distance, mingling with the singing of mermaids and the tinkling of fairies, creating the nocturnal symphony characteristic of Neverland. As the children began to fall asleep, no one noticed a shadowy figure watching the hideout from afar through a telescope. Captain Hook had found his hideout, and a plan was beginning to form in his vengeful mind. The next morning, the hideout was bustling with preparations for a big treasure hunt that Peter had planned. He had discovered an old map in one of Captain Hook's trunks during his raid on the ship, and was eager to share the adventure with everyone. Wendy was organizing provisions for the journey, preparing small parcels with fruit and bread that the lost boys had borrowed from the Indian village. John studied the compass stolen from the pirate ship, determined to be the expedition's official navigator, while Michael helped the twins tie ropes and prepare makeshift backpacks with large sheets of paper. "The treasure is hidden beyond Skull Rock," explained Peter, pointing to the worn map. "We'll have to pass through Mermaid Lagoon and cross Indian territory." Tinker Bell hovered over the map, her golden glow revealing secret markings that could only be seen with fairy light. She still maintained her protective attitude towards Peter, but had begun to tolerate Wendy's presence a little more, especially after the girl had sewn a little petal dress for her. The group set off at sunrise, with Peter leading the way through the air. The children alternated between flying and walking, saving the remaining fairy dust on their clothes. The first stop would be the Mermaid Lagoon, where they would need to get a special pearl which, according to the map, was necessary to open the treasure chest. As they approached the lagoon, the group hid behind some rocks to watch the mermaids. They were beautiful creatures, but Winnie had already realized that their beauty hid a dangerous nature. The mermaids played with each other, combing their long, colorful hair with combs made of coral and singing mesmerizing melodies. "I'm going," whispered Wendy, surprising everyone. "They're more hostile towards boys, but maybe I can negotiate with them." Peter hesitated, but nodded, respecting Wendy's courage. She approached the water's edge, and the mermaids immediately noticed her. One of them, with aqua green hair and a crown of shells, swam closer. "An earth girl," said the mermaid, her voice melodious but with a tone of disdain. "What do you want in our domain?" Wendy explained about the pearl, and to her surprise, the mermaids laughed. "Ah, yes, the magic pearl," said the crown mermaid. "We can give it to you, but it comes at a price. We want to hear a story we've never heard before." Wendy smiled, for storytelling was her specialty. She began to tell a tale about a young mermaid who fell in love with a human prince, a story she had read at home before coming to Neverland. The mermaids were completely fascinated, having never heard a story about one of their kind. Enchanted by the narrative, they gave Wendy the pearl, a luminescent jewel that seemed to contain moonlight itself inside. With the first part of their mission accomplished, the group headed towards the Indians' territory. On the way, however, they began to notice strange signs. Unnaturally broken branches, footprints that didn't belong to the island's animals, and an unsettling silence in the forest. Peter, his senses sharpened by life in Neverland, realized that something was wrong. "It's a trap," he whispered, signaling for everyone to stop. Hook followed us here. He had barely finished speaking when nets fell over them, and pirates sprang up on all sides. Captain Hook emerged from the shadows, his hook glinting menacingly. Well, he smiled mischievously. "Looks like my little plan worked perfectly. Did you really believe that map had been stolen? I'll let you find it." The children struggled in their hammocks while Tinker Bell flew around frantically, trying to find a way to help. Peter managed to free himself with his dagger, but before he could help the others, he had to fend off Hook's attacks. "This time, Pan, there's no escape," shouted the captain, engaging Peter in a sword duel. Wendy, remaining calm, realized that she still had the mermaid pearl in her pocket. Remembering the stories her mother used to tell her about magical objects, she squeezed the pearl tightly and made a wish. To everyone's amazement, the pearl began to shine brightly, and its glow attracted the attention of the nearby mermaids. The aquatic creatures, feeling connected to their magical pearl, emerged from the lagoon and began to sing. Their music was different now, not to attract but to confuse and disorient the pirates. The sailors, affected by the melody, began to stagger and drop their weapons, giving the children a chance to free themselves from the nets. Even Captain Hook seemed momentarily stunned, allowing Peter to gain the upper hand in the duel. "Now," shouted Peter, and all those who still had enough fairy dust took off. Those who couldn't fly were carried by the others, forming a curious aerial chain that moved quickly away from danger. Hook, recovering from the effect of the siren's music, shouted orders to his disoriented crew, but it was too late. The group was far enough away, although they could hear the captain's furious shouts echoing across the island. They landed in a safe clearing, all panting but laughing at the adventure and danger they had just escaped. Winnie held the pearl with even more affection now, realizing that its magic was more powerful than they had imagined. "You were amazing," Peter exclaimed to Wendy, with a genuine admiration that made Tinker Bell tinkle with renewed jealousy. But the adventure wasn't over yet. The map, although it had been Hook's trap, had revealed something real through Tinker Bell's light. Ancient markings that indicated a real treasure, one that Captain Hook himself didn't know about. As the sun began to set on Neverland, the group prepared for the next stage of their adventure. Now, with the magic pearl in their possession and knowledge of the map's true markings, they were closer than ever to discovering one of the island's greatest secrets. With the secret map markings revealed by Tinker Bell's light, the group headed towards the snowy mountains of Neverland. The real treasure, according to ancient inscriptions, was hidden in a cave near the highest peak. Peter led the way, occasionally stopping to help the others climb more difficult sections. "It's colder up here," observed Michael, hugging his teddy bear tighter. Wendy, ever attentive, improvised scars with large, soft leaves they had brought from the forest. As they climbed, the tropical vegetation gave way to rocks covered in snow and ice. The magical pearl in Wendy's possession emitted a soft glow that seemed more intense as they neared the top, as if responding to the proximity of something equally magical. John, consulting the stolen compass, noticed something strange. "The needle is spinning nonstop," he said, frowning, as if there was some kind of powerful magnetic force nearby. The Lost Boys, who would normally be the first to complain after a long walk, were unusually quiet and determined. There was something in the air, a feeling that they were about to discover something truly extraordinary. When they finally reached the entrance to the cave indicated on the map, they were greeted by an astonishing sight. Crystals of every possible color grew from the walls, creating a spectacle of light and color as Tinker Bell flew between them. In the center of the cave, there was an ice pedestal with an ancient chest. "That's it," exclaimed Peter, flying up to the pedestal. But when he tried to open the chest, he discovered that it was sealed by some kind of ancient magic. The pearl, reminded Wendy. That must be why we needed it. When Wendy brought the pearl close to the lock on the chest, something extraordinary happened. The crystals in the cave began to pulsate with a light of their own, and an ethereal voice filled the room. To open this true treasure, everyone must offer something precious, not of material value, but from the heart. The children looked at each other, confused at first, but gradually understanding the meaning of those words. One by one, they began to make their offerings. Michael was the first, placing his beloved teddy bear on the pedestal. John offered the compass, not for the object itself, but for what it represented, his search for direction and knowledge. The lost boys offered small mementos they kept from their lives before Neverland. A shiny button, a faded photo, a small spinning top. Wendy hesitated for a moment before offering something she always carried with her. A small thimble her mother had given her, a symbol of the family love she had left behind. Tinkerbell, surprising everyone, offered some of her own fairy scales, which shone like shooting stars. Peter Pan was the last. He hovered over the pedestal, struggling internally with something that seemed difficult to express. Finally, he took from his neck a necklace made of simple cord, from which hung a small rusty key. "It's the key to my house," he explained, his voice trembling slightly. "The house I left so long ago, when I decided never to grow up." When the last offering was made, the whole cave began to glow, and the chest slowly opened. Inside, there was no gold or jewels, but something much more valuable: memories. Memories crystallized in the form of light, showing precious moments in the lives of each one of them. They saw their families, their homes, moments of joy, and even sadness that they had forgotten or chosen to ignore. For the lost boys, it was the first time in years that they could clearly remember where they came from. For Wendy, John, and Michael, it was a painful but necessary reminder of the love they had left behind. Peter watched everything with an expression that mixed fascination and fear. For the first time, he could clearly see his own memories. A mother waiting with the window open, night after night, waiting for the return of the son who had chosen to fly away. It was at that moment that a familiar sound broke the spell of the moment, the clang of swords and pirate shouts echoing across the mountain. Captain Hook had followed in their footsteps in the snow. "He never gives up," sighed Nibs, preparing for another fight. But something had changed. The memories they had witnessed brought new understanding, especially for Wendy. She remembered Hook's diary, the words that revealed a lost man, not unlike the children who refused to grow up. "Wait," she said, holding Peter's arm as he drew his dagger. Maybe there's another way." When Hook and his men burst into the cave, they found not a group in battle position, but children standing around a chest of lights. Wendy stepped forward, holding the mermaid pearl. "Captain," she called, "there's something you need to see." The light of memories enveloped Hook, showing him not only his past as a respected explorer, but also the exact moment when he let bitterness transform his heart. It was a choice he had made, just as Peter had chosen never to grow up, just as each of them had made their own choices. Neverland, they finally understood, was not just a place to escape from growing up, but a place to understand that growing up didn't mean losing magic. It meant learning to carry it in a new way. The last lights of the day penetrated the cave entrance, painting everyone in golden hues. At that moment, suspended between childhood and what was to come, each of them faced a choice: to remain forever in the shadows of what they had been, or to take a step towards what they could become. And so, in Neverland, where time worked in mysterious ways and magic was in every breath, a new story began to be written. No longer about never growing up, but about growing up in the right way, carrying with them the precious memories of childhood like a treasure more valuable than all the pirates' gold. In a kingdom not so far away, where the flowers seemed to dance in the wind and the birds sang melodies that made even the most serious people smile, lived Princess Aurora. Her name promised the light of dawn, but her demeanor was far from inspiring. Aurora had everything a princess could wish for: silk dresses, glittering jewels, and servants who catered to her every whim before she could even utter them. King Edward, her father, was a kind man who, after the Queen's early death, dedicated himself to raising his daughter in the best way he could. Unfortunately, his interpretation of best way meant never saying no to Aurora, resulting in a young girl who believed the world revolved around her. On that particular spring morning, Aurora woke up annoyed because a single rose petal had fallen onto her feather pillow. "Margaret," she shouted, calling out to her lady-in-waiting, "how dare you leave the windows open at night? Now I have petals on my bed." Margaret, a middle-aged lady who had served the royal family for decades, just sighed patiently. "Forgive me, Your Highness. The windows were closed, but the flowers in your garden are especially fragrant this morning. I thought you'd appreciate the scent." "Well, you thought wrong," Aurora replied, tossing back her golden hair. "Prepare my milk and honey bath, and make sure the temperature is perfect this time." As Margaret hurried to fulfill the princess's wishes, Aurora gazed at her reflection in the ornate mirror. Her blue eyes sparkled like sapphires, and her skin was as delicate as lily petals. She knew she was beautiful. Everyone in the kingdom said so. But lately, something had been bothering her. A feeling of emptiness that not even her luxurious dresses or jewelry could fill. In the palace garden, after her elaborate morning ritual, Aurora decided to go for a walk. Not because she enjoyed nature, but because she had heard that walking kept her figure slim. As she walked along the perfectly manicured paths, she noticed something different. A small lake that she had never paid attention to before. The crystal clear waters reflected the blue sky, and aquatic flowers decorated its edges. It was then that she heard a peculiar voice, which seemed to come from one of the water lilies. Well, if it isn't the prettiest and most spoiled princess in the kingdom." Aurora spun on her heels, looking for the source of the voice. "Who dares speak to me like that?" "Down here, Your Highness," said the voice, and Aurora lowered her eyes to find a plump green toad sitting comfortably on a water lily leaf. It was no ordinary frog. Its eyes had an almost human gleam, and it wore what looked like a tiny golden crown. "A talking frog?" exclaimed Aurora, taking a step back. That's impossible. As impossible as a princess who has never learned to say please and thank you," replied the frog with a tone of amusement in his voice. "Allow me to introduce myself. Prince Thaddeus of Greenwood, or at least that's what I was before I was transformed into this not very majestic fool." Aurora laughed scornfully. "A prince? You? Please, that's ridiculous. I know all the princes in the neighboring kingdoms, and I've never heard of Greenwood or a prince called Thaddeus." The toad jumped onto a rock closer to the princess. "Maybe because Greenwood is a kingdom far, far away. Or maybe," he paused dramatically, "because you're so busy admiring your own reflection that you've never bothered to really get to know others." The frog's words hit Aurora like a slap. She felt her cheeks flush with anger and shame. "How dare you? Guards! Guards! They won't come," said the toad calmly. "Right now, only you can see and hear me. It's part of the enchantment." Aurora crossed her arms. "And I suppose you're going to tell me that you need a kiss to break the spell? Like in those silly stories my nanny used to tell me." "Precisely," exclaimed the frog, his eyes shining. "A kiss from a pure-hearted princess can break my curse. But," he added with a more serious tone, "I'm afraid you don't qualify at the moment." "What? I'm a princess," Aurora protested indignantly. "Being a princess is more than wearing crowns and giving orders, my dear. It's about having compassion, wisdom, and humility. Qualities that, forgive me for saying so, you have yet to develop." Aurora felt something strange in her chest, a mixture of anger and curiosity. Part of her wanted to simply turn her back and return to her comfortable world of privilege. But another part, a part she barely recognized, was intrigued. What if I kiss you just like that?" she asked, more to tease than out of real interest. The frog smiled, or at least seemed to smile, as much as a frog can. "Well, you could try, but I warn you, the result may not be what you expect." Moved by an impulse she couldn't explain, Aurora leaned over and, closing her eyes tightly, gave the toad a quick kiss on the top of its head. When she opened her eyes, Nothing had changed. The frog was still a frog, and she was still herself. "See, I told you it wouldn't work," said Thaddeus, sounding more amused than disappointed. "But don't worry, princess. This story has only just begun, and you have a lot to learn, as do I." Aurora felt something change inside her at that moment. Perhaps it was anger at having been deceived, or shame at having really believed that a kiss would turn a frog into a prince. But there was something else, an unsettling feeling that her life was about to change in ways she couldn't imagine. "And what happens now?" she asked, surprising herself with a genuine curiosity in her voice. "Now," replied Thaddeus, "your real journey begins. And believe me, Princess Aurora, it will be a much more interesting adventure than choosing dresses and giving orders to servants." Aurora spent the rest of that day restless, her mind constantly returning to the peculiar encounter in the garden. During dinner with her father, she barely touched her favorite meal, absent-mindedly stirring her fork through the perfectly prepared vegetables. "My dear, is everything all right?" asked King Edward, noticing his daughter's unusual behavior. "Yes, father," she replied automatically, but then hesitated. "Actually, do you believe in magic?" The king smiled gently, his eyes shining with a wisdom that Aurora rarely noticed. "I believe that magic is everywhere, but not always in the way we expect to find it." That night, Aurora couldn't sleep. For the first time in years, she dismissed Margaret early and was left alone with her thoughts. The frog's words echoed in her mind. Being a princess is more than wearing crowns and giving orders. The next morning, she returned to the lake, this time without her usual entourage of servants. Thaddeus was there, as if waiting for her. "Good morning, princess," he greeted cheerfully. "I see you decided to come back." "I had nothing better to do," she lied, trying to maintain her haughty pose, but something in her tone betrayed her. "Well, since you're here," said Thaddeus, "how about a little adventure?" Aurora raised an eyebrow. "What kind of adventure could a frog provide?" "The kind that starts with a challenge," he replied. "For a whole day, you must carry out 3 tasks without any help from your servants." "That's ridiculous," protested Aurora. "I'm a princess. I don't need." "It's precisely because you're a princess that you need to learn," interrupted Thaddeus. "How do you expect to rule a kingdom if you don't know how things really work?" The words hit Aurora hard. She had never thought about it before. One day, she would be queen, and the idea suddenly frightened her. "All right," she conceded, surprising herself. "What are the tasks?" "First task, prepare your own breakfast. Second, sew a button on a dress. Third, help in the palace garden for an hour." Aurora laughed nervously. "You're joking, right?" I don't know how." "Exactly," said Thaddeus with a satisfied smile. "And that's why you need to learn." Reluctantly, Aurora headed for the palace kitchen. The servants were stunned to see her enter, but she dismissed them with a gesture. Alone for the first time in the kitchen, she stared at the utensils as if they were alien objects. After breaking 3 eggs on the floor, burning a piece of toast, and spilling milk everywhere, she finally managed to prepare something vaguely edible. The taste was nowhere near as good as what she was used to, but there was something strangely satisfying about having made it herself. The second task proved equally challenging. Margaret tried to help her with a needle and thread, but Aurora, remembering the challenge, politely refused, for the first time in her life using please and thank you sincerely. After several attempts and a few stubbed toes, she managed to fasten the button. It wasn't perfect, but it was firm. The third task was the most difficult. The royal gardener, Mr. Thompson, an old man with calloused hands and a sun-scorched face, showed her how to pull weeds and loosen the soil. "Flowers are like people, Your Highness," he explained gently. "They need care, attention, and sometimes a bit of hard work to truly bloom." By the end of the day, Aurora was exhausted, dirty, and disheveled, a sight that would have horrified her just a day earlier. She returned to the lake, where Thaddeus was waiting for her. "I did it," she announced, dropping to the soft grass. "I did everything you asked." "And what have you learned?" asked the frog. Aurora was silent for a moment, reflecting. "I learned that things are harder than they seem, and that the people who do these tasks every day deserve more respect than I used to give them. Excellent start, Thaddeus approved. But this is only the beginning of your journey. Are there more tasks? She asked, part apprehensive, part curious. Oh yes, he replied with a twinkle in his eye. A lot more. But first, tell me, how do you feel now? Aurora looked down at her hands, slightly callous from working in the garden. Different, tired but satisfied somehow, as if I'd really achieved something today. You have, confirmed Thaddeus. You took an important first step towards becoming not just a better princess, but a better person. That night, as she prepared for bed, Aurora looked at her reflection in the mirror. Her face was slightly flushed from the sun, and there was a different sparkle in her eyes. For the first time, she saw beyond her outer beauty and began to question who she really was on the inside. Before falling asleep, she did something she had never done before. She thanked Margaret for all her years of dedicated service. Her lady-in-waiting's surprised and touched smile made Aurora realize that perhaps there really was magic in the world. Not the magic of fairy tales, but something deeper and more meaningful. And as sleep enveloped her, she wondered what other lessons the peculiar frog prince had to teach her. The next morning, Aurora woke up with a new perspective. Instead of shouting for Margaret, she opened her bedroom curtains herself, letting the golden sunlight in. Thaddeus' words about her journey were still echoing in her mind when she decided to return to the lake. "Ah, you're back," exclaimed the frog, jumping happily over the water lilies. "And I see you're not wearing your usual jewelry today. I'd without unconscious fit touch tied about a night. I thought they might get in the way, depending on what you had planned for today." "Very perceptive," replied Thaddeus with a toad-esque smile. "Today we're going to work on something even more important than practical tasks. We're going to exercise your heart." "My heart?" asked Aurora, confused. "What's wrong with it?" "Nothing's wrong, it's just dormant, like a seed that needs water and sun to sprout," explained Thaddeus. "Today you'll be visiting 3 people in the kingdom who need help." Aurora frowned. "But we have advisors for that. They look out for the needs of the people." "Exactly the kind of thinking we need to change," replied Thaddeus. "A true leader knows her people personally. Come, I'll guide you." So began an unusual journey, a princess following a leaping frog along the paths of the kingdom. People looked on curiously, but Aurora was too determined to care about the whispers. The first stop was the house of an old woman who lived alone on the outskirts of the castle. Her small hut had a roof that was in urgent need of repair. Lady Maria introduced Thaddeus, one of the best weavers in the kingdom. Before her eyesight began to fail, Aurora observed the lady, who was trying to repair a loom with trembling hands. Without thinking twice, she approached and asked if she could help. "Princess," the lady's eyes widened. "What are you doing in my humble home?" I've come to see how I can help," Aurora replied, surprised at her own sincerity. Over the next 2 hours, Aurora learned about weaving, heard stories about what the kingdom was like when her mother was still alive, and promised to send someone to fix the roof. A promise that, for the first time, she really intended to keep. The second visit was to a family with 5 children. The father had been injured working in the fields and couldn't provide for them temporarily. The children, although hungry, smiled and played. "How can they be happy with so little?" whispered Aurora to Thaddeus. "Because they have each other," he replied simply. "Sometimes the greatest wealth isn't in the kingdom's coffers." Aurora spent the afternoon helping her mother prepare soup with the few ingredients available. Her culinary skills were still precarious, but the children applauded her efforts as if it were the finest royal banquet. The last visit was to the kingdom's orphanage. Aurora had always known of its existence, but had never been interested in getting to know it. As she entered, her heart squeezed at the sight of so many children without families. "Don't they have anyone?" she asked Thaddeus, her voice breaking. "They have each other, and now they have you too if you choose." A small girl approached Aurora, offering a wildflower. "It's for you, princess. You're even more beautiful than they say." Aurora felt tears welling up in her eyes, not from vanity, as was usually the case when she received compliments, but from genuine emotion. She spent the rest of the afternoon listening to stories, playing games, and promising herself that she would make significant changes to those children's lives. When she returned to the castle, it was already evening. Her father, King Edward, was waiting for her worriedly. "Where have you been all day, my child?" "Really getting to know our kingdom, father," she replied, hugging him. "And I've learned so much. Can we talk about some changes you'd like to propose?" The king noticed something different in his daughter's eyes, a maturity that hadn't been there before. "Of course, dear. Let's have dinner, and you can tell me all about it." During dinner, Aurora spoke passionately about everything she had witnessed, about Madame Maria in her loom, about the family in need, about the children in the orphanage. To her surprise, her father listened attentively, occasionally taking notes. "I'm proud of you, Aurora," he said at last. "Your mother always said that one day you would discover your true purpose as a princess. It seems that day has come." Later, by the lake, Aurora shared with Thaddeus the results of her conversation with the king. "He's agreed to set up a special fund to help families in need," she said excitedly. "And we're going to renovate the orphanage. Eh?" "Easy, easy," laughed Thaddeus. "Rome wasn't built in a day. The important thing is that you're beginning to see beyond your own reflection." Aurora gazed at the lake water, watching her reflection ripple gently. "You know, Thaddeus, I'm beginning to understand why the kiss didn't work that first day. I wasn't the princess I needed to be." "And now," he asked, Now I know I still have a lot to learn, but I want to learn. I want to be better." The frog nodded in satisfaction. "That's exactly the kind of magic we're looking for. True transformation is not always visible to the eye." As the stars began to dot the night sky, Aurora realized that her life had changed irrevocably. Not because of a magical kiss or an enchantment, but because of something much more powerful, the discovery of her own heart. In the days that followed, Aurora established a new routine. Every morning, before the sun had even risen, she met Thaddeus at the lake to discuss the day's lessons. Her father, King Edward, noted with satisfaction the changes in his daughter, especially her growing concern for the well-being of the kingdom. "Today," announced Thaddeus on a particularly cool morning, "we're going to talk about promises and responsibilities." Aurora sat down on the grass, already accustomed to their morning conversations. "I've kept all the promises I've made recently," she defended herself. "Yes, and that's admirable," agreed the frog. "But today I want you to understand the weight of a royal promise. Do you know the history of your kingdom?" Aurora hesitated. She certainly knew the basic stories that her tutors had taught her, but she realized that she had never really been interested in the history of her people. "Perhaps not as well as I should," she admitted. "Then today you'll find out. Go to the royal library and look through the ancient records of the kingdom. There's one story in particular that you need to know." In the library, Aurora found Margaret organizing some books. Her lady-in-waiting smiled as she entered, a genuine smile, no longer the cautious one she used to give. "Margaret," Aurora called out, "how well do you know the history of the kingdom?" "Oh yes, Your Highness. My family has served the crown for generations." "What specific history are you looking for?" "Actually, I don't know exactly," Aurora confessed. "But something tells me I'll know when I find it." They spent the morning among ancient scrolls and books. Aurora discovered that, unlike what she had imagined, reading wasn't tedious when you were genuinely interested. It was then that she came across a particular record that caught her eye. "Margaret, look at this," she exclaimed. 100 years ago, there was a great drought in the kingdom. The people were starving and desperate. "Ah yes," nodded Margaret. "The Great Drought. That's when your great-great-grandmother, Queen Eleanor, took the Great Oath." Aurora read eagerly. Queen Eleanor had promised the people that as long as there was food in the castle, no citizen of the kingdom would go hungry. She turned part of the royal gardens into community gardens and set up a food distribution system that still worked today, although Aurora had never paid any attention to it. "That's why we have the royal barns," exclaimed Aurora, connecting the dots. "And the harvest festivals." "Exactly," smiled Margaret. "Every monarch since has renewed that oath. It's one of the kingdom's most important traditions." Aurora read on, discovering other promises made by her ancestors. Commitments to education, health protection. Each promise had changed the kingdom in some way, creating the structure she had always taken for granted. She returned to the lake with her head full of thoughts. Thaddeus was waiting patiently. "So, he said. What have you discovered? I discovered that being royalty is not about privileges, but about responsibilities, she replied. Every promise made by my ancestors has shaped the kingdom in some way. And that makes you think about your own promises? Aurora reflected on the promises she had made recently. To help Lady Mary, to support the family in need, to improve the orphanage. Yes, each promise is like planting a seed. It needs to be carefully cultivated. Excellent analogy, Thaddeus approved. And speaking of seeds, how's the community garden you started? Aurora smiled, remembering the project she had started after her visit to the family in need. She had converted part of the castle's ornamental gardens into vegetable gardens, following her great-great-grandmother's example. It's growing, she replied. The children from the orphanage come to help every afternoon. It's amazing to see how proud they are when something they've planted starts to sprout. And you? Do you feel proud? I do, but it's different from the pride I used to feel. Before it was about me, my looks or my talents. Now it's about seeing others grow, about making a difference. At that moment, a butterfly landed on the water lily next to Thaddeus. Aurora watched its colorful wings and thought about how she herself was transforming, not by magic, but through small daily changes. Thaddeus, she began hesitantly, about that first day, when you said you were a bewitched prince, was it true? The frog looked at her with his enigmatic eyes. What do you think? I think that perhaps the real curse wasn't your frog form, but my inability to see beyond appearances. You're getting wiser every day, princess, he replied with a smile. Aurora spent the rest of the day revisiting the project she had started. At the orphanage, she helped the children with their lessons. She herself had insisted that they have regular teachers. In the community garden, she worked alongside the villagers, her once delicate hands now calloused by honest work. In the evening, over dinner with her father, she finally plucked up the courage to make a special request. Dad, she began, I'd like to take part in the next royal council. I want to better understand how decisions are made and how I can help improve the lives of our people. King Edward looked at her with surprise and pride. Of course, my child. In fact, I've been waiting for you to ask. Was I? Yes. You have shown a genuine interest in the kingdom and its responsibilities. It's time to start preparing you properly for your future role as queen. Aurora felt the weight of those words, but unlike a few weeks ago, she didn't feel scared. Instead, she felt ready to face the challenge. Later, in her quarters, Aurora wrote in her diary, a habit she had recently acquired. She recorded her discoveries about the history of the kingdom, her plans for the future, and her reflections on how she had changed. Perhaps, she wrote, the real magic is not in turning frogs into princes, but in turning hearts of stone into hearts that care. Autumn arrived in the kingdom, and with it a gentle change in the colors of the leaves that perfectly reflected the transformation Aurora had undergone. At her first royal council meeting, she surprised everyone with her insightful observations and practical suggestions for improving the lives of the citizens. The princess has shown a wisdom beyond her years, one of the senior counselors commented to King Edward after the meeting. That afternoon, Aurora went to the lake as usual, but something was different. Thaddeus was not at his usual water lily. Worried, she searched among the water flowers and called his name several times. Looking for someone? A familiar voice sounded behind her, but it wasn't the friendly croak she was used to. Aurora turned and froze. In front of her stood a young man, tall and elegant, with eyes she would recognize in any form. The same piercing, gentle eyes as Thaddeus. How? She began, but the words failed her. Remember what I said about true magic? He asked, smiling. It wasn't about kisses or instant enchantments. It was about transformation, yours and mine. Aurora sat down on the grass, trying to process what she was seeing. So you really were a prince? I'm Thaddeus of Greenwood, yes, he confirmed, taking a seat next to her. But my story is a little different from what you first imagined. He explained that he had been sent by his own kingdom, disguised as an enchanted frog, to help Aurora on her journey of self-discovery. The magic was real, but it only served as a means to a greater end. My kingdom and yours have an ancient alliance, he continued. When your father expressed concern about your future as ruler, my family offered to help in an unconventional way. Aurora should have been irritated by the manipulation, but instead she felt grateful. "You could have simply introduced yourself as a visiting prince. And you would have listened to me?" he asked, raising an eyebrow in a familiar way. Aurora laughed, recognizing the truth in his words. "Probably not. I was so. You were exactly who you needed to be to start your journey," he interrupted gently. "We each have our own path to growth." In the days that followed, Aurora continued her work in the kingdom with even more dedication. The orphanage now had its own school, the community garden was flourishing, and she had established a regular program of visits to different parts of the kingdom. Thaddeus remained her advisor, now officially, and together they implemented significant changes. The pampered princess who had once complained about petals on her pillow now spent her days working tirelessly for the well-being of her people. One afternoon, while supervising the construction of a new wing at the orphanage, Thaddeus noticed Aurora watching the children play. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "About how true nobility has nothing to do with titles or crowns," she replied. "It's in what we do for others, in the promises we keep, in the love we share." "You've really learned your lessons," he smiled. "I had an excellent teacher," she replied, returning his smile, even if he was a frog for a while. King Edward watched the changes in his daughter with growing pride. The kingdom prospered under her ever-increasing influence, and the people loved her not for her outward beauty, but for her kindness and dedication. One starry night, Aurora and Thaddeus walked through the palace gardens, now very different from the purely ornamental beds of before. Flowers and vegetables grew side by side, symbolizing the union between beauty and utility that Aurora had learned to value. "You know," she said, stopping near the pond where it all began, "I think I've finally understood the true meaning of that kiss story." "And what would that be?" he asked, curious. "It wasn't about changing someone into something else. It was about seeing the true essence of each person, about looking beyond appearances and finding the beauty within." Thaddeus nodded, satisfied. "And what else?" "That sometimes we need to lose ourselves to find ourselves. That true royalty is not in blood or title, but in actions and heart." The kingdom continued to prosper under the shared leadership of Aurora and Thaddeus, who eventually married, not out of convenience or political arrangement, but out of a love born of mutual respect and true understanding. And so the story that began with a kiss that wasn't magical ended with the most powerful magic of all, the transformation of a heart through love, compassion, and wisdom. The lake where it all began became a special place in the kingdom, where people went to reflect and find inspiration. And if anyone paid close attention, they might hear the distant croaking of a frog, reminding everyone that true magic lies not in instant transformations, but in the gradual changes we make to our lives and the hearts we touch along the way. The pampered princess who once existed was now just a distant memory, replaced by a wise and compassionate leader who understood that true nobility comes not from birth, but from the choices we make every day. And so our story ends, not with an instant happily ever after, but with the ongoing promise of growth, love, and transformation, the most powerful magic of all. In Mr. Nicolaus' little toy store, where the dust danced gently under the golden rays that came through the old windows, a very special box awaited its fate. Inside it, 25 little lead soldiers rested neatly, all cast from the same mold, except for one small detail that would make all the difference. The last little soldier had been born with only one leg. Little Joao, the town doctor's only son, was turning 8 that fall afternoon, and his eyes lit up when he received the box of little soldiers as a present. His mother, always attentive to detail, had chosen that particular set after noticing how the little boy was enchanted by the stories of bravery and honor that his father used to tell him before bedtime. When he got home, Joao ran to his room, a magical space where toys of all shapes and colors lived together in perfect harmony. On top of the old wooden chest of drawers, next to the window, a delicate cardboard castle housed a graceful ballerina. She stood in eternal balance on a single leg, the other extended backwards in a perfect arabesque, her arms delicately arched above her head. as if she were about to begin her dance. John carefully arranged the little soldiers in formation on the same chest of drawers, creating a guard of honor that stretched from the castle to the edge of the cabinet. The one-legged soldier, being different, was placed in the last position from where he had a privileged view of the dancer. It was at that moment that something extraordinary happened, something that only the toys could perceive. The little soldier, in his leaden silence, felt his inflexible heart beat in a different way. The ballerina, with her white tulle skirt decorated with sparkling sequins and her graceful posture, seemed to float even though she was motionless. He noticed that, like him, she also balanced on a single leg, although hers was by artistic choice while his was her only option. During the day, when Joao played with his little soldiers, our little hero strove to be as brave as his lead brothers, making up for his physical lack with even more bravery. At night, when the lights went out and the house sank in a silence, the toys came to life and the little soldier took every moment to admire his beloved ballerina. In Joao's room, other toys also inhabited that magical world. There was a mischievous goblin who lived in a box of surprises, always watching everything with an enigmatic smile. His black eyes often fixed on the little soldier with an expression that mixed disdain and envy. The elf couldn't bear to see how the ballerina, so delicate and refined, would cast gentle glances at the imperfect little soldier. On one of those magical nights, as the moonlight streamed through the window and bathed the room in its silvery glow, the little soldier summoned up all his courage to approach the cardboard castle. With a lot of effort, balancing on his one leg and leaning on his bayonet, he slowly advanced up the dresser ledge. The ballerina, sensing his approach, maintained her graceful pose, but her painted eyes seemed to take on a special glow. The little soldier, even though he couldn't speak, expressed all his love through his determined gaze and proud posture. It was as if a silent song filled the air between them, a melody that only their hearts could hear. However, the goblin from the box of surprises was not happy about this closeness. His face contorted with envy as he plotted to separate the two. He knew that the little soldier, because he only had one leg, was more vulnerable than the others, and this difference would be the key to his malicious plan. The next morning, as the first sunlight began to awaken the town, the goblin put his plan into action. Taking advantage of a breeze coming through the ajar window, he sneaked over to the chest of drawers. With a quick, precise movement, he pushed the little soldier, who was standing near the edge of the dresser, watching his beloved ballerina. The little lead soldier, taken by surprise, couldn't keep his balance. In a split second, he found himself falling towards the floor, while the ballerina, helpless on her pedestal, could only watch in horror. The sound of the lead hitting the wooden floor was muffled by the carpet, but the impact was enough to send the little soldier rolling under the furniture. Thus began a series of adventures and misadventures that would test not only the little lead soldier's endurance, but above all the strength of his love for the ballerina. While he lay under the dresser, amidst the dust and cobwebs, his brave heart was already planning how to return to his post, next to his beloved. The goblin, from the top of his box, smiled with satisfaction at his act of evil, without imagining that this was only the beginning of a story that would prove that true love knows no physical limitations or seemingly insurmountable obstacles. The ballerina, maintaining her elegant pose, let an invisible tear run down her paper cheek, or her heart hoped that her beloved little soldier would find a way back to her. And so, on that seemingly ordinary morning, an extraordinary journey of love, courage, and perseverance began, where a little lead soldier with only one leg would demonstrate that true strength does not lie in physical perfection, but in the greatness of the heart and the determination of the soul. The little lead soldier, lying under the dresser, watched the dust dance in the beams of light that penetrated through the crack. His heart, although made of metal, beat with the determination to return to his beloved dancer. The hours dragged by as he planned his return, knowing that he would have to wait until nightfall, when magic would allow him to move freely. During the day, John searched for his lost little soldier, but couldn't reach the narrow space under the heavy furniture. The boy's mother, with her broom, also tried to reach the toy while cleaning, But the little soldier had rolled even further away, close to the wall. When night finally came and the house fell silent, the little soldier began his journey. With determination, he used his bayonet as a support and began to crawl across the floor. The distance to the dresser leg seemed endless, but each movement brought him a little closer to his goal. High above, the ballerina maintained her graceful pose, but her eyes were fixed on the darkness below, waiting for a glimpse of her beloved little soldier. The goblin, satisfied with his mischief, watched everything with a malicious grin, planning new obstacles for the brave soldier. As he crawled along, the little soldier found a small stuffed mouse, long forgotten under the dresser. The toy, covered in dust, offered to help the soldier. "I can take you to the edge of the carpet," he whispered, "but watch out for the house cat who often comes by at night." Accepting the help, the little soldier climbed onto the stuffed mouse's back and moved quickly through the darkness. The soldier's heart was pounding, a mixture of hope and apprehension. Every meter he traveled brought him closer to his beloved, but also exposed him to new dangers. As they reached the edge of the carpet, a familiar noise made the stuffed mouse freeze. Whiskers, the family cat, entered the room through the ajar door. His yellow eyes shone in the darkness as he sniffed the air, sensing the unusual movement. The little soldier, knowing he couldn't turn back, faked the mouse and continued on his own, creeping even more cautiously. Every move had to be calculated so as not to attract the feline's attention. The wooden floor, with its gaps and irregularities, made the journey even more challenging. From her elevated position, the dancer watched the scene with a heavy heart. She wanted to scream, to warn her beloved of the danger that was approaching, but her paper voice produced no sound. The goblin, on the other hand, took the opportunity to create more confusion. With one swift movement, he dropped a small marble which rolled across the floor, making a soft noise, but enough to attract Mustache's attention. The cat, intrigued, began to approach the spot where the little soldier was. In a moment of pure instinct, the little soldier threw himself into a crack in the floor, just in time to avoid the feline's curious paws. There, squeezed between the wooden planks, he could feel his leaden heart beating fast. The darkness was complete, but his determination remained unshaken. The little soldier had to wait patiently until Mustache lost interest and moved away. During this time, he thought of the ballerina, her delicate smile, and her infinite grace. It was this thought that gave him the strength to carry on, even when everything seemed to be conspiring against him. When he finally managed to get out of the crevice, the little soldier realized that he had been dragged along by the current of air passing under the floor. Now he was in a different room, the living room, even further away from his beloved ballerina. The moonlight coming through the living room window revealed a new world of challenges. Huge pieces of furniture cast mysterious shadows, and the silence was occasionally broken by the nocturnal noises of the house. The little soldier knew he would have to cross all this unknown territory to get back to John's room. On the way, he found other forgotten toys that had slipped under the furniture over the years. A cracked marble offered directions. A wheel-less cart shared stories of other toys that had tried to make the same journey. Each encounter strengthened their resolve not to become just another lost toy. Meanwhile, in the bedroom, the ballerina bravely resisted the onslaughts of the goblin, who tried to convince her that the little soldier would never return. "He's just an imperfect soldier," sneered the goblin. "He's probably already lost forever in the far reaches of the house." But the ballerina kept her faith. In her eternally graceful pose, she knew that her beloved little soldier wouldn't give up easily. The love they shared was stronger than any physical obstacle or malicious provocation. The little soldier continued his journey around the room, using his one leg and his bayonet to propel himself. Each movement was a test of balance and perseverance. He discovered that he could use the bangs of the room's carpet as ropes to hoist himself up, and the patterns on the floor as a map, so as not to get lost. The night advanced, and with it grew the little soldier's urgency to return before dawn. He knew he had to find a way back to his room before the house woke up and his movements were once again limited by daylight. His determination was fueled not only by his love for the dancer, but also by his desire to prove that his limitations did not define his worth. Every obstacle he overcame was a victory not only over the circumstances, but over the prejudice that the goblin represented. And so, the little lead soldier continued his journey through the sleeping house, his heart full of hope and courage, while the ballerina, in her eternal arabesque, patiently awaited his return. The night still held many adventures and challenges, but true love has the power to illuminate even the darkest paths. The little lead soldier finally managed to find an opening that led to the kitchen, where the black and white tiled floor formed a giant tray under his feet. Dawn was approaching when he spotted something that made his metal heart freeze. A small gap under the back door, through which a stream of air was inexorably sucking him in. He tried to resist, but his one leg couldn't find enough support on the wax tiles. In a matter of seconds, the little soldier found himself sliding towards the outside of the house. The morning breeze carried him across the garden, making him roll on the dew-damp grass. The sun was just beginning to rise over the horizon when the little soldier realized he was being dragged along by a stream of water from the rain that had fallen during the night. His leaden body, too heavy to swim against the current, was heading towards a storm drain. As he was carried, he thought of the dancer and how his love now seemed even more distant. The goblin would certainly be celebrating his misfortune, but the little soldier maintained his dignified posture even in the face of adversity. His determination remained as unshakable as the metal he was made of. The water led him through a labyrinth of underground pipes, where he found other lost objects, bottle caps, dried leaves, and even a paper boat which, despite being soaked, still held its shape. "Come on up," invited the little boat, offering to help the soldier. With a lot of effort, the soldier managed to hoist himself onto the little paper boat, which now served as his improvised vessel. Together, they sailed through the dark canals, guided only by the distant sound of running water. The little boat told the soldier stories of other objects it had found on its aquatic adventures. The journey through the tunnels seemed endless, until a flash of light indicated the exit to a stream that ran through the city. The little soldier found himself sailing under the open sky, passing under bridges where children were playing without noticing the little sailor in his paper boat. In John's room, the ballerina remained in her pose, but her inky eyes looked sadder. The goblin, pleased with the disappearance of the little soldier, danced around her, humming taunts about how the imperfect soldier had been taken away forever. Back at the stream, the little boat and the soldier faced increasingly rough waters. "Hold on tight," shouted the little boat when they spotted a small waterfall ahead. The waterfall wasn't high, but for a lead soldier and a paper boat, it represented a formidable challenge. The impact of the fall was devastating. The paper boat, already soaked, finally broke apart, leaving the little soldier alone in the current. He maintained his impeccable posture even as he sank, his one leg and his bayonet pointed skywards as if in a final salute. Then something unexpected happened. A large fish, attracted by the glint of lead in the water, quickly approached and, in one sudden movement, swallowed the little soldier whole. In the dark interior of the fish, the little soldier kept his composure, thinking that even this seemingly hopeless situation could prove to be an opportunity. The fish, satisfied with its metallic meal, swam peacefully down the stream until it reached the town market, where it was picked up by a shopkeeper. By an extraordinary coincidence, that same fish was sold to the cook at John's house, who took it to prepare the family's dinner. In the kitchen, when the cook cut into the fish, her eyes widened when she found the little lead soldier perfectly preserved inside. Recognizing it as one of John's little soldiers, she carefully cleaned it and gave it back to the boy. John, thrilled to have his lost soldier back, ran to put it back with the others on the dresser. The soldier's heart beat fast as he found himself once again close to his beloved ballerina, who maintained her graceful pose, but now had a special sparkle in her eye. The elf watched the scene in disbelief and anger, his apparently perfect plan having been thwarted by fate. The little soldier's determination and love had proved stronger than all the adversity he had faced. That night, when everyone was asleep, the little soldier told the other toys about his adventure. The ballerina listened attentively to every detail, her paper heart overflowing with joy at having her beloved back. The goblin, defeated, retreated to the bottom of his box, planning his next attempt to separate the lovers. But the little soldier and the ballerina knew that their love had been strengthened by their trials. Every obstacle they overcame was proof that true feelings know no limits, be they physical or imposed by others. The little one-legged soldier had shown that true strength lies in the heart, no matter what material it is made of. As the moon bathed the room in its silvery light, the little soldier stood guard next to the cardboard castle, his one leg firm, his posture impeccable, his leaden heart beating to the same rhythm as his ballerina's delicate paper heart. The night had only just begun, and new adventures surely awaited our brave hero. Life in the playroom had resumed its routine, but something had subtly changed since the little soldier's return. The ballerina seemed to dance even more gracefully when night came, and her gaze met the little soldier's with an intensity that made the other dolls sigh with admiration. The goblin, however, had not given up his evil plans. For days, he silently watched the couple in love, studying their movements and waiting for the perfect moment for his revenge. His opportunity came on a particularly cold night when the family lit the fireplace in the living room to ward off the chill. John had brought some of his toys to play with by the cozy fire, including the little soldier and the ballerina. The boy created an elaborate story in which the brave soldier protected the delicate dancer from imaginary dangers. When sleep came, John was put to bed, leaving his toys on the side table in the living room. It was then that the goblin put his cruelest plan into practice. Taking advantage of a sudden gust of wind that came through the poorly closed window, he pushed the little soldier towards the flames of the fireplace. The little lead soldier, taken by surprise, felt the intense heat approaching his metallic body. The ballerina, witnessing the imminent danger, did something she had never done before. She broke her eternal pose. In one graceful, desperate movement, she launched herself towards her beloved, her paper skirt fluttering like wings. Her gesture of unconditional love, however, ended up sealing her own fate as a spark leapt from the fireplace, hitting her delicate garment. The other toys watched in horror as the flames began to consume the paper and tulle that made up the ballerina. The little soldier, even as he felt his own leaden body begin to melt from the intense heat, kept his eyes fixed on his beloved. At that moment, there was no longer any difference between them. They were just two souls united by the purest love. The elf, realizing too late the magnitude of his evil, tried to help, but the fire had already taken on irreversible proportions. The flames danced around the couple, creating ghostly shadows on the walls of the room. It was as if the fire itself was paying a final tribute to the gracefulness of the ballerina and the bravery of the little soldier. As his leaden body slowly melted, the little soldier kept his impeccable posture, his one leg steady until the last moment. The dancer, for her part, returned to her characteristic pose, as if performing her final dance in the flames that were consuming her. Their eyes remained fixed on each other, communicating without words all the love they shared. The heat from the fireplace turned the little soldier's lead into a small, shiny puddle, while the ballerina's ashes danced in the air like little black snowflakes. The other toys swore they saw, for a brief moment, two silhouettes rising from the flames, dancing together in perfect harmony, finally free of all physical limitations. The next morning, when the maid went to clean the fireplace, she found something extraordinary among the ashes. A small lead heart, perfectly formed from the little soldier's molten metal. Next to it, mixed in with the ballerina's ashes, a delicate piece of paper in the shape of a star had survived the flames, as if fate itself wanted to preserve one last vestige of that transcendental love. John was deeply saddened to discover the fate of his beloved toys, but there was something poetic about the way they left together. The elf, consumed by guilt, was never the same again. His mischievous smile disappeared, replaced by an expression of eternal regret. The other toys in the room turned the story of the little soldier and the ballerina into a legend, told in whispers on silent nights. They talked about how true love knows no limitations, about how courage and devotion can overcome any obstacle, even death itself. On particularly quiet nights, when the full moon bathed the room in its silvery light, some toys would swear they saw two shadows dancing gracefully on the dresser, in the exact spot where the cardboard castle used to stand. It was as if the little soldier and the ballerina had found a way to continue their love story, transcending the barriers of the material world. The little lead heart and the paper star were carefully kept by John in a small music box, which played a soft waltz tune. Every time he opened it, the boy remembered the story of the imperfect little soldier who proved to be the most perfect of lovers, and the ballerina who chose love above all else. And so, even after its seemingly tragic end, the story of the one-legged soldier and his ballerina lived on, inspiring others to believe in the transformative power of true love. For, as the wisest toys used to say, it's not the physical shape that defines the greatness of a heart, but its capacity to love unconditionally. Years had passed since that fateful night, and John's room had changed considerably. The boy had grown up, and many of his old toys had been put away or given away, but the little music box containing the lead heart and the paper star remained on his desk, like a precious treasure he refused to forget. One fall afternoon, similar to the one when the little soldier had first arrived at the house, John, now a young man, found his own 5-year-old son, Pedro, gazing curiously at the music box. The boy's eyes shone with the same intensity as his own had done so many years ago. "Dad, what is this box?" asked Pedro, his small hands gently touching the carved surface. John smiled and sat down next to his son. As he opened the box, the soft melody of a waltz filled the room, and the two small objects, the lead heart and the paper star, seemed to take on a special glow in the evening light. "This, my son, is the most extraordinary story I've ever known," John began, his eyes lost in memories. And so he shared with Peter the saga of the one-legged soldier and his beloved ballerina. The boy listened attentively, his eyes wide with fascination at each new twist in the narrative. While John was telling the story, something magical began to happen in the room. The light of the setting sun, filtering through the window, cast dancing shadows on the walls, and the melody of the music box seemed to take on new, deeper, and more meaningful notes. Peter, enchanted by the story, asked to hold the little treasures. John carefully placed the lead heart and the paper star in his son's little hands. The moment the objects touched the boy's skin, a soft, inexplicable wind blew through the room, making the curtains dance. "Dad, look!" Peter exclaimed, pointing to the wall. The shadows had taken on different shapes. A little soldier and a graceful ballerina were dancing in perfect sync to the sound of the waltz. John blinked several times, unsure if his eyes were deceiving him, but the vision remained. The lead heart in Peter's hand began to emit a faint glow, and the paper stars sparkled as if sprinkled with fairy dust. The magic that had once inhabited the playroom seemed to have reawakened, bringing with it the memories of a love that had transcended all barriers. The shadows on the wall told their own story. They showed the little soldier on his journey through the house, his adventure in the stream, the moment inside the fish, and finally, the final dance in the flames. But this time, there was no sadness in the narrative. Instead, each scene pulsed with the celebration of a love that not even fire could destroy. Peter, amazed, watched the dancing shadows with the enchantment of childhood, that ability to see magic where adults see only the ordinary. John, for his part, felt transported back to his own childhood, remembering the nights when he watched his toys, imagining the secret lives they led when no one was looking. The melody of the music box reached its crescendo, and the shadows of the little soldier and the ballerina began to multiply, filling all the walls of the room. It was as if they were presenting a grand spectacle, a celebration of the eternity of their love. "Dad, they're still alive, aren't they?" asked Pedro, his voice full of hope. John hugged his son, realizing that some stories never truly end. They just find new ways to continue existing through the generations. "In a way, yes," replied Joao softly. As long as there are people to tell their story, as long as there are hearts capable of understanding the depth of their love, the little soldier and the ballerina will live on. As evening approached, the shadows began to fade, but the glow of the lead heart and the paper star remained. Pedro carefully returned the objects to the music box, which continued its sweet melody. "Can I tell this story to my friends?" asked Pedro, his eyes still shining with emotion. Joao nodded, knowing that the legacy of the little soldier and the ballerina would live on, inspiring new generations with their message of unconditional love and courage in the face of adversity. That night, while Peter slept, John stayed in his room for a few more moments, watching the music box. For a moment, he could have sworn he saw a reflection in the mirror, a little one-legged soldier, perfectly poised, dancing with a graceful ballerina, their movements in perfect harmony. And so the story of the little lead soldier and his paper ballerina continued, no longer just as a reminder of lost toys, but as an eternal testament to the transformative power of true love. On silent nights, when the moon bathed the room in its silvery light, it was still possible to hear the distant echo of a waltz and sea. In the shadows of the walls, two lovers dancing eternally, free of all earthly limitations, united forever in their immortal love. The Harrison family's old mirror had remained untouched in the attic for decades. Sarah, a 16-year-old teenager, had always felt an inexplicable attraction to that object covered in a weathered sheet. That autumn afternoon, while organizing some boxes at her mother's request, her fingers brushed against the dusty fabric that concealed the Victorian mirror. "Don't touch that," warned Emily, her best friend, who was helping her with the cleaning. "My grandmother always said that old mirrors hold stories that are best not awakened." Sarah rolled her eyes, but couldn't hold back a shiver when an icy breath blew through the attic, making the floorboards creak. "Do you really believe in such superstitions? It's just an old mirror." "It's not just any mirror," said Emily, approaching cautiously. "They say it belonged to Mary Sullivan, that woman who mysteriously disappeared in the 50s. Have you ever heard the story?" Sarah nodded, her curiosity piqued. The attic, lit only by the dim light coming in through a small circular window, seemed the perfect setting for supernatural stories. Emily sat down in an old rocking chair, which protested with a high-pitched groan. Mary was a young widow who lived alone in the house next door. People said she practiced strange rituals after she lost her young son in an accident. One night, neighbors heard screams coming from her house. When the police arrived, they found only this mirror with scratch marks on the glass. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine, but remained skeptical. And how did this mirror get here? Her grandmother bought Mary's house at an auction, along with some furniture. This mirror was one of them. Emily lowered her voice. "They say that if you look closely, you can see dark stains that look like dried blood." At that moment, thunder echoed in the distance, making the two girls jump. The approaching storm cast unsettling shadows across the attic, bringing the covered shapes of the old furniture to life. "Had you ever heard of the Bloody Mary ritual?" asked Emily, her voice almost a whisper. Sarah nodded, who hadn't heard that urban legend. "Well, some people believe that this mirror is especially receptive to that kind of invocation." Sarah laughed nervously, trying to disguise her discomfort. "Don't tell me you want to try." "Of course not," Emily replied quickly. "But today is October 31st, Halloween. If there's ever a time for scary stories, this is it." The rain began to fall outside, its drops drumming on the roof like restless fingers. Sarah found herself staring at the covered mirror, wondering what could be hiding under that dusty sheet. "My mother tells me that her grandmother used to have terrible nightmares after she brought that mirror home," Emily continued. "She used to say that she saw a woman in a white dress stained with blood standing at the foot of the bed, always pointing to the attic." Sarah felt her heart race. The story was stirring her more than she'd like to admit. Why didn't anyone ever get rid of him? "They tried," Emily replied, leaning forward. 3 times. Each time, the mirror mysteriously returned to the attic the next morning. A new clap of thunder, closer now, made the lights flicker. For an instant, Sarah swore she saw a movement reflected in the small piece of the mirror that was exposed where the sheet had slipped. "Let's go downstairs," suggested Emily, standing up abruptly. "It's getting late, and your mother asked us to finish before nightfall." But Sarah remained motionless, her eyes fixed on the mirror. There was something hypnotic about it, something that called to her. Without realizing it, she took a step forward, her fingers reaching for the sheet. "Sarah." Emily tried to stop her, but it was too late. The fabric slid smoothly away, revealing the mirror in all its dark glory. The frame was adorned with intricate carvings of rose bushes, their flowers and thorns so detailed that they looked real. The glass, although dulled by time, still reflected their images with disturbing clarity. And it was then that Sarah noticed. There were 3 reflections in the mirror, not 2. A pale, hazy figure hovered behind them, its form undefined but undeniably feminine. For an instant that seemed like an eternity, no one moved. The air in the attic became dense, charged with an ancient, malevolent energy. Emily was the first to react, pulling Sarah tightly by the arm. The two stumbled down the stairs, closing the attic door with a bang. Gasping, they looked at each other in the second-floor corridor. Did you see it?" Emily stammered, her face pale as wax. Sarah nodded slowly, unable to form words. Her mind tried to rationalize what she had just witnessed, but there was no logical explanation for that third figure in the reflection. That night, lying in her bed, Sarah couldn't stop thinking about the mirror and its mysteries. The storm continued outside, and each flash of lightning seemed to illuminate shadows that shouldn't have been there. In her head, a voice whispered tantalizingly, "3 times? To say my name 3 times?" What Sarah didn't know was that that encounter in the attic had triggered a series of events that would change her life forever. Mary Sullivan's mirror held darker secrets than any urban legend could suggest. And now that it had been discovered, it would not rest until it had completed its purpose. Halloween night was just beginning, and with it, a horror story that had spanned generations was about to repeat itself. Sarah Harrison had inadvertently opened a door to a world of shadows and distorted reflections, and now she would have to face the consequences of her curiosity. Sarah spent the night tossing and turning in bed as the storm continued outside. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw that hazy figure in the mirror, its shadowy presence etched into her memory. His cell phone vibrated on the bedside table. It was a message from Emily. "I can't sleep. I keep thinking about what we saw. We need to do more research on Mary Sullivan." Sarah agreed, feeling a mixture of fear and curiosity consume her. She turned on her laptop and started digging through old archives of the local newspaper available in the city's digital library. Emily was right. There was more to the story. The records showed that Mary Sullivan wasn't just a lonely widow. Before her disappearance, she had become a controversial figure in the community. Several people reported unexplained events in her presence, and some even accused her of practicing witchcraft. The most disturbing was the account of her last day, October 31st, 1952. According to the report, neighbors heard Mary reciting something repeatedly before the screams. When the police broke down the door, they found only the mirror in the living room, with nail marks on the glass and drops of blood on the floor. The body was never found. The light in Sarah's room flickered, startling her. In the reflection of the computer screen, for an instant, she swore she saw a pale face watching her. Turning quickly in her chair, she found only her empty room and the dancing shadows caused by the lightning. The next morning, Sarah woke up with a backache from falling asleep in her chair. The sun shone timidly through the clouds that still covered the sky, as if the storm of the night before had never existed. Emily arrived early, carrying a pile of old books. "I found these in my grandfather's library," she explained, spreading the volumes out on Sarah's bed. "They're books about local folklore and the town's history. There are a few mentions of Mary Sullivan and other similar cases." The girls spent the morning immersed in the yellowed pages. They discovered that, before Mary, there had been other mysterious disappearances in the region, all connected in some way to antique mirrors. In each case, the victims reported seeing a woman in a white dress in their reflections days before they disappeared. Look at this. Emily pointed to a particularly interesting page. According to this legend, antique mirrors can serve as portals to the other side, but they need to be fed. Fed? Sarah asked, feeling a chill. With souls, Emily replied, her voice trembling slightly. Legend has it that spirits trapped between worlds use mirrors to attract victims. Each soul captured makes them stronger. A noise from the attic interrupted the conversation. The two looked at each other, paralyzed. It was as if something was dragging on the floor above them. It's probably just the house cracking, Sarah tried to rationalize, but her voice sounded unsure. Sarah, Emily hesitated. Don't you think it's strange that your family never got rid of that mirror? As if something was stopping them. The question hung in the air, heavy as lead. Sarah thought of all the times her mother avoided talking about the attic, how her grandmother always kept the door locked, how no one in the family liked to go up there. We need to find out more about what happened to Mary, Sarah decided, and about how she got that mirror in the first place. The girls decided to visit Mary Sullivan's old house, now occupied by an elderly couple. Mrs. Peters, the current resident, greeted them with curiosity when they mentioned Mary's name. Oh, that poor woman, sighed Mrs. Peters, pouring tea. My husband and I found some of her things in the basement when we moved in. Letters, diaries. We never had the heart to throw them away. Sarah and Emily exchanged excited glances. Mrs. Peters went upstairs to collect the documents, leaving the girls in the old room. On the walls, several decorative mirrors reflected the afternoon light. Don't you think there are too many mirrors in here? Emily whispered uneasily. Before Sarah could answer, Mrs. Peters returned with a dusty box. Among the yellowed papers, they found what appeared to be Mary Sullivan's diary. The last entries were disturbing. The mirror is calling me again, stronger and stronger. It promises to give me back my Thomas. It says I can see him on the other side, but the price is too high. Sarah felt her heart race as she read those words. Thomas was the name of the son Mary had lost. According to the diary, she had bought the mirror from a mysterious antique dealer who had shown up on her doorstep a few days after the boy's funeral. There's something else here, Emily murmured, pulling a yellowed envelope from the bottom of the box. Inside, a black and white photograph showed Mary Sullivan standing next to the infamous mirror. But what caught the girls' attention was the reflection caught in the glass. Where Mary's image should have been, there was only a dark, distorted silhouette. The sound of breaking glass upstairs made the three women jump. Mrs. Peters went upstairs to check, leaving Sarah and Emily alone with their disturbing discoveries. Sarah, Emily whispered, her voice trembling, look at all those mirrors in the living room. Don't you think they look different now? Sarah observed the reflections around her. On each mirrored surface, the shadows seemed denser, deeper than they should be. And in each of them, there was a subtle movement, as if something or someone was watching. Mrs. Peters didn't return. The minutes dragged by while Sarah and Emily remained paralyzed in the room, surrounded by increasingly disturbing reflections. The silence was absolute, except for the ticking of the antique clock on the wall. We need to check that she's all right, Sarah whispered, slowly getting up. Emily grabbed her arm. We mustn't separate, she replied, her eyes fixed on the mirrors that seemed to pulsate with an energy of their own. Together, they climbed the creaking staircase. In the corridor on the second floor, shards of glass glittered on the floor. One of the mirrors had shattered inexplicably, but there was no sign of Mrs. Peters. Mrs. Peters? Called Sarah, her voice trembling. No answer. In every room they checked, they found more mirrors, some covered by sheets, others exposed, all emanating an aura of malevolence that made their hearts race. Sarah, look at this. Emily pointed to an ajar door at the end of the corridor. It was a small office, its walls covered in yellowed newspaper clippings. As they approached, they realized that they were all about mysterious disappearances over the decades. They weren't just stories, Emily muttered, studying the clippings. It's happened before, many times. A pattern began to emerge. Each disappearance was connected to old mirrors, and they all occurred in 7-year cycles. The last documented case was that of Mary Sullivan in 1952. Wait, Sarah calculated mentally. If the pattern continues, this year, it's the next cycle, Emily added, her face pale. A loud thud from upstairs startled them both. It was coming from the attic. Sarah held tightly to Mary's diary, which she still carried, feeling that its pages held crucial answers. Determined to find Mrs. Peters, they went up to the attic. The door was ajar, a dim light escaping through the crack. As they entered, their eyes took a while to adjust to the dimness. The attic was a labyrinth of old mirrors, all uncovered, their reflections multiplying the space infinitely. In the center, on a round table, there was an open book and a candle that had almost been consumed. "It's a grimoire," Emily whispered, approaching the book. "Look at these notes. They're rituals for communicating with the other side." Sarah flipped through Mary's diary, looking for connections. The last few pages revealed a frightening truth. Mary hadn't simply disappeared. She had discovered a ritual to bring her son back, using the mirrors as portals. "She wasn't the first," Sarah read aloud. "The mirror. It travels from person to person, promising to fulfill their deepest desires. But it's a trap." A movement in the reflections caught her eye. For an instant, all the mirrored surfaces showed the same image. A woman in a white dress, stained with blood, holding the hand of a small child. "Thomas," an ethereal voice echoed through the attic. "Is that you, my son?" The girl slowly turned around. Mrs. Peters was standing in the doorway, but there was something wrong with her gaze. It was empty, glazed. "She's possessed," Emily whispered, stepping back. "No," Sarah realized, "it's Mary. She's never left this house. She's in all the mirrors." The figure of Mrs. Peters advanced mechanically, her hands outstretched. "I need my son. I need to complete the ritual." Sarah flipped frantically through the diary, looking for answers. The pages revealed that Mary had discovered how to use the mirrors to create a network of portals, each fed by the life energy of its victims. "The mirror in your house," Emily said, understanding. "It's not just a portal, it's the original. The first one." The temperature in the attic plummeted. In the reflections, shadows began to move independently, forming distorted silhouettes that contorted and reached towards them. "We need to destroy it," Sarah declared, clutching the diary to her chest. "It's the only way to free them all." But when they tried to move towards the door, they found that they were surrounded. In each mirror, a different version of Mary Sullivan watched them, some crying, others smiling malevolently. "No one leaves," Mrs. Peters / Mary's voice echoed. "Not until the ritual is complete." Sarah realized that it was no coincidence that they had found the mirror in the attic of her house, just as it was no coincidence that they were there at that moment, discovering the truth. The mirror had planned everything, patiently waiting for the right moment to complete its macabre cycle. The candle on the table flickered, casting dancing shadows across the walls. In each reflection, the images began to distort, revealing glimpses of another world, a place of darkness and despair, where lost souls wandered eternally. "There's something in the diary," Emily said, flipping through the pages quickly. "A counter-ritual." Mary tried to undo what she had started, but she couldn't complete it. The words were interrupted by a high-pitched scream. Mrs. Peters had collapsed, her body writhing on the floor as a dark mist emanated from her eyes and mouth. The mirrors began to vibrate, their surfaces rippling like water. Sarah and Emily found themselves at a crucial moment, surrounded by distorted reflections and a supernatural force that had waited decades for this moment. Whatever they did next would determine not only their fates, but also that of all the souls trapped between the mirror worlds. And at the center of it all, the original mirror waited in its attic, its blackened surface pulsing with an ancient and evil energy, ready to claim its next victims. Sarah gripped the diary with renewed strength, her eyes frantically scrolling through the pages as Emily tried to help Mrs. Peters. The dark mist emanating from the unconscious woman began to take shape in the air, revealing silhouettes that danced like living shadows. "Here," exclaimed Sarah, her finger trembling over a stained page. Mary discovered that the original mirror needs to be destroyed at a specific time, when the veil between the worlds is at its thinnest. "Midnight on Halloween," Emily added, understanding. Exactly when Mary disappeared, the antique clock downstairs began to chime, its chimes echoing through the house like a dark omen. It was only 2 hours to midnight. But there's more, Sarah continued reading. The ritual needs to be performed by someone who shares a connection with the mirror. Someone from the lineage of one of the victims. A shiver ran down her spine as the realization hit her. Her grandmother had bought Mary's house and mirror. It was no coincidence. The mirror had chosen her family, waiting patiently for the right moment. The temperature in the attic continued to drop, and now their breaths formed little clouds in the air. In the reflections, Mary's images multiplied infinitely, some crying, others laughing, all coming closer and closer to the surface of the mirrors, as if they were trying to cross them. "Sarah," Emily whispered, her voice trembling, "look at Mrs. Peters." The old woman's body began to transform, her skin acquiring an unearthly pallor. Her eyes, when they opened, were completely black. When she spoke, it was no longer her voice. "You don't understand," Mary's voice said through her. "It's not just about my Thomas. There are so many others, so many lost souls. We need to set them free." "Free them or imprison them?" Sarah challenged, holding up the diary like a shield. "The mirror doesn't free anyone. It only consumes." A supernatural wind swept through the attic, causing the pages of the grimoire on the table to turn furiously. The flames of the candles danced violently, casting shadows that seemed to have a life of their own. Emily, who had approached the grimoire, began to read aloud. "The mirror feeds on pain and loss. The stronger the desire for reunion, the more powerful it becomes. Mary wasn't its first victim. She was just another in a long line of desperate souls." Sarah felt something tug at her mind, like a distant call. Images began to flow into her consciousness. Her grandmother, young and frightened, staring into the same mirror, generations of women before her, all lured by the promise of reunion with lost loved ones. "We need to act now," Sarah decided, her voice finding strength. "If we wait until midnight, the mirror will be at its most powerful." "But the ritual," Emily began to protest. "We can't follow his rules," Sarah interrupted. "That's how he manipulates us. We need to do something unexpected." At that moment, Mrs. Peters/Mary stood up, her body moving unnaturally. "You can't interfere. The cycle must be completed." The surfaces of the mirrors began to ripple like liquid mercury, and spectral hands emerged from them, trying to reach the girls. The air became thick with an ancient, malevolent energy. Sarah looked at the diary in her hands, then at Emily, and finally at the original mirror in her own attic, visible through the window of the neighboring house. An idea began to form in her mind, a dangerous one, but perhaps her only chance. "Emily," she said, her voice low and urgent, "I need you to trust me. When I tell you run to my house and get the mirror from the attic, bring it here." "But Sarah, it's the only way. If we can gather all the mirrors, including the original one, maybe we can overload the ritual, force it to self-destruct." The shadows around them intensified, and Mary's voice echoed throughout the attic. "You can't stop what's already in motion. The veil is opening, and all those who were lost will return." Sarah watched the reflections twist and turn, each surface showing a different aspect of the shadowy world beyond the glass. In some, she saw familiar faces, people who had disappeared over the years, all trapped in a limbo between worlds. "Now, Emily," Sarah shouted, pushing her friend towards the door as she herself faced the possessed figure of Mrs. Peters. Chaos ensued in the attic. The mirrors vibrated with deafening frequency, their surfaces continually cracking and reconstituting themselves. The dark mist emanating from Mrs. Peters began to take on more defined forms, silhouettes of all the mirror's victims over the centuries. Sarah held Mary's diary tightly, its pages now glowing with a light of their own, as if the words written so long ago were awakening. She began to recite the counter-ritual, but not as Mary had written it. She reversed it, turning the words of invocation into an incantation of banishment. Time seemed to distort as she waited for Emily to return. Each second dragged on like hours, and the shadows around her grew denser and more threatening. The power of the mirror was growing, fueled by the approach of midnight. The battle for the salvation of the trapped souls was about to reach its climax, and Sarah knew that the next decisions would determine not only her fate, but that of all those who had been captured by the dark reflection over the years. The real test of her courage and determination was just beginning. Time seemed to compress and expand as Sarah held her position, reciting the inverted words of the ritual. The mist around her became denser and denser, and the voices of the trapped spirits echoed in a supernatural cacophony. Emily burst into the attic, carrying the original mirror with difficulty. Her face was pale and sweaty. "Sarah, there's something wrong. The mirror, it's pulsating." Indeed, the surface of the mirror was emitting a reddish, pulsating glow like an evil heart. When Emily positioned it next to the other mirrors in the attic, a wave of energy ran through all of them, making them vibrate in unison. "Fools!" Mary's voice thundered through Mrs. Peters. "You have just completed the circle. The portal is now complete." Sarah realized her mistake too late. By bringing in the original mirror, they had inadvertently strengthened the connection between the worlds. The mirrored surfaces began to melt like wax, their shapes merging into a single gigantic portal. "Emily, the grimoire!" Sarah shouted, still holding the journal. "There must be something we can use." As Emily frantically flipped through the old pages, Sarah noticed something in Mary's notes that she hadn't seen before. Among the smudges and scribbles, there was a pattern, a repeating symbol, always drawn with what looked like dried blood. "The blood is the key," Sarah murmured, understanding. "It's not about destroying the mirrors. It's about breaking the bond." Mrs. Peters' figure began to twitch unnaturally, her body arching at impossible angles. The mist that enveloped her took the definitive form of Mary Sullivan, but not as the desperate woman who had disappeared decades ago. This was a corrupted version, her black eyes like bottomless pits, in her white dress stained dark red. "So many years," the apparition spoke, her voice reverberating throughout the attic. "So many souls collected, and now, finally, the ritual can be completed." The clock began to chime, announcing the approach of midnight. Each chime made the mirrors pulse more strongly, and spectral figures began to emerge from the liquid surfaces, all the victims of the mirror over the centuries. Sarah looked at Emily, who still held the grimoire, and then at the diary in her own hands. In a moment of clarity, she understood what needed to be done. "Emily," she called out, her voice firm despite her fear. "Remember when we were children and we made that blood pact? We need to do it again. Now." Emily understood immediately. Together, they cut their palms with a piece of broken glass, their blood mixing. Sarah began to recite the counter-ritual again, but this time, Emily joined her, their voices intertwining in perfect harmony. The girl's blood dripped onto the pages of the diary and the grimoire, and something extraordinary happened. The written words began to glow with a golden light, and a wave of pure energy emanated from the books, colliding with the spectral mist. Mary screamed, a sound that didn't belong in this world. "No, what have you done?" "We broke the circle," Sarah replied, feeling an ancient force flow through her. Not with hatred or revenge, but with love and sacrifice. The portal began to destabilize, the mirrors cracking one after the other. The trapped souls began to free themselves, no longer corrupted by the evil power of the mirror, but purified by the girl's blood sacrifice. Mary's spectral form began to change, the darkness in her eyes giving way to a light of understanding. For a moment, Sarah saw the woman she had really been, a mother devastated by loss, manipulated by an ancient force that fed on her pain. "Thomas," Mary called out, her voice now soft and clear. A small luminous figure emerged from the fragments of the mirrors, the spirit of her son, finally free from a spectral prison. "Mama," the child's voice echoed through the attic, and Mary stretched out her arms, tears of joy streaming down her ethereal face. The final stroke of midnight rang out as mother and child were reunited in a luminous embrace. A wave of golden light exploded from the point of contact, sweeping through the attic and shattering all the mirrors simultaneously. Sarah and Emily hugged each other, shielding themselves from the rain of broken glass. When the light dimmed, they found Mrs. Peters unconscious but breathing normally. The mirrors were shattered, their surfaces reduced to glittering dust that floated in the air like tiny stars. On the floor, among the shards, Mary's diary and the grimoire had turned to ash, their function fulfilled. The cycle of horror that had lasted for generations was finally broken. In the days that followed, Sarah and Emily discovered that all the old mirrors in the city had shattered that night. People reported visions of golden lights and feelings of inexplicable peace. Gradually, the stories of the mysterious disappearances were forgotten, like nightmares that fade with the sunrise. Mrs. Peters didn't remember what had happened, but her face carried a serenity that hadn't been there before. As for the attic of Sarah's house, it had been transformed into an ordinary room, full of light and free of the shadows that had inhabited it for so long. The girls kept their secret, but the small scars on their palms remained as a reminder of the power of sacrifice and true friendship. Sometimes, on particularly dark nights, they swore they saw golden reflections in the corner of their eyes. No longer a sign of terror, but a reminder that even in the deepest shadows, the light of love and courage can find its way through. And somewhere, beyond the veil between the worlds, a mother and her son finally found the peace they had sought for so long, free from the spectral chains that had kept them trapped in a dark reflection for generations. In the depths of eternal night, where not even the stars dared to shine, Quetzalcoatl contemplated the void that would one day be filled by humanity. The feathered serpent, whose scales shone with the brilliance of 1,000 suns and whose feathers danced with the grace of the heavenly winds, carried the weight of a divine mission in his heart. The 4 previous attempts at creation by his brother gods had failed, leaving only bones and bitter memories in the realm of the dead. Tezcatlipoca, his brother and eternal rival, watched from his smoking mirror, his enigmatic expression revealing both curiosity and skepticism. "Brother," his voice echoed across the divine plains. "Why do you insist on giving life to such imperfect creatures? Haven't you seen how previous attempts have ended in destruction?" But Quetzalcoatl knew something that the other gods didn't understand. As he glided through the skies in his serpentine form, his feathers reflecting the colors of the rainbow, he realized that the true power of creation lay not in perfection, but in the capacity for evolution and learning. On his journey to Mictlan, the realm of the dead, Quetzalcoatl met Mictlantecuhtli, the Lord of Death, guardian of the bones of past creations. The god of death, with his discarnate skull and spider-web robes, would not make the feathered serpent's mission any easier. "Why should I hand over the remains of previous failures?" he asked in his cavernous voice. It was then that Quetzalcoatl proposed the challenge. "Allow me to collect the bones, and in return, I promise to create beings who will honor both life and death, understanding the sacred cycle of existence." His words, full of wisdom and determination, echoed through the dark corridors of the underworld. Meanwhile, on the earthly plane, young Xochitl, one of the few survivors of the Fourth Era, wandered the desolate fields. Her existence was a mystery even to the gods, for she had survived the destruction that had decimated her generation. Her dark eyes held memories of a world that no longer existed, and in her heart burned the hope of a new dawn. Xochitl found shelter in an ancient cave, where cave paintings told the story of previous eras. There, she began to understand her role as a witness to the transition between worlds. Her hands traced the outlines of the figures on the wall, feeling the energy of the stories they told. In the celestial realm, other gods watched Quetzalcoatl's actions with renewed interest. Tlaloc, the god of rain, was preparing his sacred waters for when the time came to nourish the new creation. Calcayotlicu, mistress of lakes and rivers, wove streams of crystalline water that would one day flow through the earth. Quetzalcoatl's search for the sacred bones would not be easy. Mictlantecuhtli, always cunning, prepared 9 deadly challenges. The first was to cross a river of blood, where the souls of the dead tried to drag to the bottom any being who dared to cross it. With his divine wisdom, Quetzalcoatl transformed some of his feathers into a bridge of light, allowing him to cross the river without touching its scarlet waters. Each feather that touched the surface momentarily transformed the blood into crystal clear water, revealing the purifying power of the feathered serpent. Meanwhile, Xochitl began to dream of ancient voices whispering secrets about the coming creation. In his dreams, he saw a feathered serpent dancing among the stars, and his heart recognized in that vision the promise of a new beginning. The challenges continued, each one more difficult than the last. Quetzalcoatl faced cutting winds that could shatter mountains, crossed fields of sharp obsidian that tried to pierce his divine form, and withstood the freezing cold capable of paralyzing time itself. On his journey, the feathered serpent discovered that each obstacle was not just a test of strength or courage, but a lesson in the nature of the life he intended to create. Humanity would need to be as resilient as he was being, able to adapt and overcome adversity. In the sixth challenge, Quetzalcoatl found a mirror that reflected not his image, but the failures of previous creations. He saw beings who had succumbed to greed, others who had lost themselves in ignorance, and some who had been destroyed by their own arrogance. Each reflection was a warning and a lesson. Xochitl, in her cave, began to gather people like herself, scattered survivors who wandered aimlessly. Together, they began to create small rituals, celebrating the sun and the moon, keeping alive the flame of hope for a new world. The stories they shared at night, around small fires, were like seeds of a new culture waiting to blossom. Without knowing it, they were preparing the ground for the teachings that Quetzalcoatl would bring to future humanity. As Quetzalcoatl neared the end of his challenges, an ancient energy began to awaken. The skies shook with distant thunder, and the earth pulsed with a forgotten rhythm. It was as if the universe itself was holding its breath, waiting for the moment of new creation. The last challenge would be the hardest, facing their own fears and doubts. At the bottom of Mictlan, in a chamber made of black obsidian, Quetzalcoatl saw reflections of all possible futures, some glorious, others terrible. The choice to go ahead with the creation of humanity carried the weight of all these possibilities. It was at this moment that the true nature of his mission was revealed. The creation of humanity would not just be an act of divine power, but an act of love and faith in the potential of what was to come. With this understanding, Quetzalcoatl crossed the last chamber, finally reaching the sacred bones. Mictlantecuhtli, impressed by the perseverance and wisdom shown, allowed Quetzalcoatl to collect the bones, but not without a final warning. What you create with these bones will carry both the memory of failure and the seed of hope. Choose wisely how you shape your essence. With the sacred bones in his possession, Quetzalcoatl began his ascent back to the upper world, where he would begin the real work of giving life to the new humanity. In his mind, he was already visualizing the knowledge he would share, the art of growing corn, the secrets of the stars, the mathematics that explains the cycles of nature, and the medicine that heals body and spirit. With the sacred bones in his hands, Quetzalcoatl emerged from the Mictlan, his feathers glowing with renewed intensity. The weight of the ancestral bones was not only physical, but spiritual, carrying with them the memories and experiences of previous creations. As it ascended, tiny fragments of light escaped from between its feathers, like shooting stars announcing the dawn of a new era. Xochitl and his small group of survivors observed the luminous phenomenon in the sky with wonder and amazement. The dancing lights seemed to form patterns, telling ancient stories in a language that their hearts, but not their minds, could understand. An old woman among them, called Lali, recognized the signs. "It's the return of the feathered serpent," she whispered, her wrinkled eyes fixed on the celestial spectacle. The ancients spoke of this moment, when the divine and the earthly would meet again. On the celestial plane, Quetzalcoatl was preparing the ritual of creation. His divine blood, precious and powerful, would be the catalyst that would transform the inert bones into pulsating life. Each drop that fell on the ancestral bones carried not only vital power, but also wisdom and purpose. Tezcatlipoca, still skeptical but now intrigued, approached his brother. "I see you've made the bones," he observed, his smoky mirror reflecting the process of creation. "But how do you intend to avoid the mistakes of the past?" Quetzalcoatl, without interrupting his sacred work, replied wisely, "The mistakes of the past will be the lessons of the future. This time, we won't just create bodies, we'll plant seeds of knowledge and understanding." Meanwhile, on the Earth's surface, subtle changes were beginning to take place. The previously barren soil was beginning to show signs of life. Tiny green shoots emerged from the earth, and the air carried a different scent, as if nature itself was preparing to welcome its new guardians. Xochitl, guided by an inexplicable impulse, led her group to a valley surrounded by ancient mountains. There, they found a spring of crystalline water flowing from the earth, as if Calcayatlicu was preparing the way for what was to come. There, they began to build a small settlement. Their calloused hands erected simple shelters, while their hearts were filled with inexplicable hope. Silali taught the younger ones the old songs, keeping alive the memory of a time that would soon be reborn. On the divine plane, the process of creation continued. Every bone bathed in the blood of Quetzalcoatl began to pulsate with a life of its own. First came the men, their bodies formed from the essence of the earth and the spirit of the wind. Then came the women, born of the power of water and the heat of the sun. But this creation was different from the previous ones. Quetzalcoatl not only gave physical form to the new beings, but also imbued them with special abilities. In their minds, he planted the seeds of knowledge that would blossom with time and dedication. "Look," he said to the other gods who had now gathered to witness the birth of the fifth humanity. "These are not just receptacles of our will, but carriers of divine potential." The first men and women opened their eyes to a world that awaited them. Their bodies, still covered in the glow of divine blood, shone like polished copper under the rising sun. In their eyes shone a curiosity that none of the previous creations had ever shown. Quetzalcoatl watched them with the pride of a creator and the concern of a mentor. He knew that his work had only just begun. These new beings would need guidance, knowledge, and above all, an understanding of their place in the great cycle of existence. In the valley where Xochitl and his group settled, the signs of change intensified. The sky took on more vibrant colors, and the winds brought melodies never heard before. The stars themselves seemed to rearrange themselves in the firmament, forming new patterns that told the story of creation in progress. Citlali, in her ancestral wisdom, began to interpret these signs. Her words, shared around the night fires, prepared the survivors for the encounter with the new humanity that was about to emerge. "We will be the bridges," she declared, "between what was and what will be. Our memory will serve as a guide for those who are coming." On the divine plane, Quetzalcoatl continued his meticulous work. Each new being received not only life, but also unique gifts. Some were born with an affinity for understanding plant cycles, others with the ability to read the patterns of the stars, and some with the gift of healing and comfort. The other gods, initially skeptical, began to see the wisdom in Quetzalcoatl's plan. Tlaloc prepared the rains that would nourish the first crops, while Zacaquetzal, goddess of the arts and love, wove the first dreams that would inspire human creativity. As more and more beings came to life, a new energy filled the universe. It was as if each element, earth, water, fire, and air, found a new balance, a long-lost harmony. The new humans, different from their predecessor creations, were born with a natural connection to these elements. Xochitl, sensing the changes in the air, began to prepare his group for the encounter with the newly created. Under his guidance, they built a simple temple in the center of the valley, a place where the divine and the earthly could meet. The moment of the meeting between the survivors and the new humanity was approaching, and with it, the promise of a new chapter in the history of the world. Quetzalcoatl, watching from his heavenly plane, knew that this meeting would be crucial for the future he envisioned. The meeting between the two groups was about to take place. Under Quetzalcoatl's watchful eye, the first men and women of the new creation began their journey towards the valley where Xochitl and his companions were waiting. The air vibrated with an ancient and new energy at the same time, as if the very fabric of reality was adjusting to this unique convergence. Citlali, the elder, gathered everyone around the newly built temple. Her trembling hands lit sacred herbs, whose sweet scent spread through the morning air. "They come with the knowledge of the gods in their hearts," she said, "but they will need our memories to understand who they are." The new beings, guided by an instinct implanted by their creator, moved with grace and purpose. Their bodies still glowed softly with the remnants of Quetzalcoatl's divine blood, and their eyes carried an ancient wisdom mixed with childlike curiosity. At the head of the group walked a woman called Mayayul, whose footsteps made flowers bloom wherever she went. Xochitl, watching from the top of a hill, felt his heart race as he saw the first signs of the approach. The stories he had kept for so long, the memories of ages gone by, seemed to throb in his chest, eager to be shared. On the celestial plane, Quetzalcoatl continued his work, now focused on weaving the invisible threads that would connect the two groups. Each new being he created carried not only innate knowledge, but also the ability to learn from those who came before. It was a delicate dance between the divine and the earthly, between the new and the old. The first meeting took place at sunrise. Mayayul, leading the newly created, stopped in front of Xochitl. For a moment, they just looked at each other, recognizing each other as different parts of the same story. It was Citlali who broke the silence, singing an ancient song of welcome that made the mountains reverberate with its melody. The new beings brought with them the gifts that Quetzalcoatl had given them. A man called Tlalixin showed them how to read cloud patterns to predict rain. A young woman called Zacapili revealed the secret of the medicinal plants that grew hidden among the rocks. Each piece of knowledge shared was like a bridge being built between the two worlds. In return, the survivors offered something equally precious, the living memory of past eras. Xochitl told of the 4 previous creations, of the mistakes and lessons learned. His words were like seeds planted in fertile soil, ready to blossom in the consciousness of the new humanity. Tezcatlipoca, watching through his smoking mirror, began to understand the true genius of his brother's plan. "It's not just a new creation," he muttered to himself. "It's a synthesis, a harmony between the past and the future." The next few days were filled with intense learning and exchange. The newly created, although born with divine knowledge, discovered that there was much to learn from the earthly experience of the survivors. They learned about resilience from Xochitl, about ancestral wisdom from Citlali, about the importance of community from everyone else. In the valley, the small settlement began to transform. New dwellings sprang up, built with techniques that combined the celestial knowledge of the newcomers with the practical experience of the survivors. Gardens were planted following the sacred patterns taught by Quetzalcoatl, but adapted to the local wisdom about the soil and the seasons. Mayayul and Xochitl became inseparable partners in the task of building bridges between the two groups. Together, they developed new rituals that honored both divine teachings and earthly memory. Their voices joined in songs that told the complete story of humanity, from the first attempts to the present moment of renewal. Quetzalcoatl, satisfied with the progress, began to prepare his last teachings. He knew that he would soon have to leave for the East, but first, he needed to ensure that humanity had all the tools it needed to prosper. Through dreams and visions, he shared his knowledge of astronomy, mathematics, and the sacred arts. Citlali, realizing that her role as guardian of ancient memory was coming to an end, began training the younger members of both groups in the arts of preserving history. "Our words are seeds," she taught, "planted in the heart of time, blossoming in future generations." As the days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months, a new culture began to emerge in the valley. It was neither entirely divine nor entirely earthly, but a harmonious fusion of both. The rituals incorporated both the mathematical precision of heavenly teachings and the intuitive wisdom of human experience. Tezcatlipoca, who had initially doubted the success of this creation, now regularly visited the valley through the reflection of his mirror. He watched with growing interest as this new humanity learned to balance divine knowledge with earthly experience, ancient wisdom with innovation. The other gods also began to contribute more actively. Tlaloc sent gentle rains to nourish the first crops, while Calcalicu blessed the rivers that cut through the valley. Each divine intervention was received with gratitude and understanding by a humanity that now understood its place in the great cycle of existence. In the heart of the valley, the simple temple that Xochitl and his companions had built became a center of learning and celebration. There, divine and earthly knowledge met and multiplied, creating new ways of understanding and interacting with the world. As the new civilization flourished in the valley, Quetzalcoatl realized that the moment of his departure was approaching. From high in the heavens, he watched with satisfaction as his teachings were not only learned, but transformed and enriched by the unique union between the newcomers and the survivors. Mayahul had become a natural leader, her connection with the earth and the plants inspiring others to develop their own gifts. Under her guidance, vast fields of golden corn stretched across the valley, cultivated with techniques that blended divine knowledge with the practical experience of the survivors. Xochitl, for his part, established a school of memory, where the stories of past ages were preserved through paintings, songs, and ritual dances. His students learned not only to remember, but to understand the lessons contained in each ancient narrative. It was during one of these classes that a young man called Tonutiu had a vision. While Xochitl was telling him about the previous creations, he clearly saw the image of Quetzalcoatl heading east, his bright feathers leaving a trail of light in the sky. The sight deeply disturbed him. "The feathered serpent will be leaving soon," he announced, his voice trembling with the weight of the revelation. The silence that followed was thick as morning mist, each person present sensing the truth in the young man's words. Lali, who was present, nodded slowly. "Yes, the stars have spoken about it. It's part of the cycle. The master must leave so that the disciples can grow up on their own." The news spread through the valley like wind through corn leaves. Some were apprehensive, fearing that without the direct presence of their creator, they might repeat the mistakes of previous humanities. Others understood that this was a necessary test of their maturity. Mayahul assembled a council of the wisest, including members of both the newly created and the survivors. "We need to prepare," she declared, "not just for his departure, but to keep his teachings alive." Meanwhile, on the celestial plane, Quetzalcoatl was preparing his last gifts for humanity. He created sacred codices in which he recorded knowledge about celestial cycles, plant medicine, and the principles of universal harmony. Each page was imbued with its own divine essence, ensuring that the knowledge remained alive and evolving. Tezcatlipoca, observing his brother's preparations, approached with a question: "Why leave now, when your creation is still so young?" "Because they need to learn to walk on their own," replied Quetzalcoatl. "The true test of a master is not how much his disciples depend on him, but how they thrive in his absence." In the valley, Xochitl and Mayahul worked tirelessly to prepare the community. They established a teaching system where each person with a specific gift was responsible for passing on their knowledge to a group of apprentices. In this way, wisdom would be preserved and expanded through the generations. Tonutiu, inspired by his vision, began to study the patterns of the stars with renewed intensity. Together with other young men, he built an observatory on top of a hill where they mapped the celestial movements and recorded their discoveries in carefully crafted codices. Lali, sensing that his own time of departure was approaching, intensified his teachings on sacred rituals. "The connection with the divine," she explained, "does not depend on the physical presence of the gods, but on our ability to keep the sacred flame alive in our hearts." As the moment of Quetzalcoatl's departure approached, a subtle transformation began to take place in the valley. People began to trust more in their own abilities, discovering that the divine knowledge they had received was like a seed that now blossomed in unique ways in each person. Mayahul discovered that the plants responded not only to the technical knowledge he had received, but also to his own intuition and connection with the earth. Under his care, new varieties of medicinal plants began to emerge, combining known properties in innovative ways. Sochil realized that the stories he told were not just records of the past, but living tools that help people understand their present and shape their future. Each ancient narrative took on new meanings as it was interpreted through the experiences of the new humanity. The other gods, observing these transformations, began to understand the true nature of Quetzalcoatl's plan. It wasn't just about creating a new humanity, but about establishing a self-sustaining cycle of spiritual evolution and growth. Tlaloc, impressed by the way humans had learned to work in harmony with their elements, began to respond more readily to their prayers and rituals. The rains came at the right time, nourishing not only the crops, but also the understanding of the connection between heaven and earth. In the heart of the valley, the simple temple had been transformed into a complex of learning and celebration. Different areas were dedicated to the study of astronomy, medicine, agriculture, and the arts. Each sacred space reflected the unique fusion of divine knowledge and human experience. Finally, the day of Quetzalcoatl's departure arrived. The valley awoke to a different light, as if the sun itself were hesitating on its way across the sky. The people gathered spontaneously in the central temple, their hearts heavy with the expectation of the imminent farewell. Mayhul and Sochil led the preparations for the farewell ritual. Copal incense spiraled through the air, while drums set a rhythm that echoed the very pulse of the earth. Citlali, now an even more respected figure, guided the youngsters in the sacred chants that would cross the dimensions between the earthly and the divine. On the celestial plane, Quetzalcoatl was making his own preparations. His feathers shone with an intensity that dazzled even the stars, and his serpentine body formed patterns in the sky that astronomers would study for generations. Tezcatlipoca, its eternal counterpoint, watched in respectful silence. Tonatiuh, from the top of his observatory, recorded every movement in the heavens. His codices now contain not only astronomical observations, but also prophecies about the promised return of the feathered serpent. The stars show cycles, he explained to the other scholars, and every cycle promises a return. Quetzalcoatl's descent into the valley was spectacular. His celestial body created a multicolored aurora that bathed the entire region in prismatic light. The plants bowed towards him, and even the wildest animals emerged from their hiding places to witness the moment. In front of the gathered crowd, Quetzalcoatl took on a form closer to human understanding, still divine, but less dazzling. His voice, when he spoke, was like ancient music carried by distant winds. My children, the time has come for you to follow your own path. The next words were engraved not only in the codices, but in the hearts of every person present. You carry within you both my blood and your own essence. The knowledge I have shared is not a chain that binds you, but wings that will allow you to fly. Mayhul stepped forward, offering Quetzalcoatl a garland made of flowers that had been born from his own footsteps. Father Creator, she said, her voice firm despite her emotion, how will we know if we are following the right path? The feathered serpent's reply was accompanied by a smile that lit up the valley. The right path is the one you create by walking with wisdom and compassion. Don't just try to imitate my steps, but learn to dance your own dance. Sochil, who had kept the memories of so many ages, then understood something profound. This was no ordinary farewell, but a transformation. Each person present was now a guardian, not only of the knowledge received, but of the potential to create new knowledge. Quetzalcoatl continued his final teachings. True wisdom does not lie in having all the answers, but in knowing how to ask the right questions. The universe is a mystery that reveals itself to those who keep their hearts open and their minds curious. Citlali, sensing that this moment would echo through the ages, began an ancient chant that spoke of cycles and returns. Other voices joined in, creating a harmony that seemed to weave the very threads of fate. Before leaving, Quetzalcoatl performed one last creative act. With a flick of his feathers, he created a sacred garden in the center of the valley, where each plant contained a different lesson, each flower a secret of the universe. This will be a meeting place between the divine and the earthly, he explained, where they can always renew their connection with the sacred. The moment of departure itself was marked by an extraordinary transformation. Quetzalcoatl rose into the sky, his serpentine body expanding until it seemed to embrace the entire eastern horizon. His feathers fell gently, each one shining like a star before dissolving into thin air. Tenorio, watching from his post, took note of how the departed god left a trail in the sky that formed a specific pattern, a celestial map that could be used to predict his return. He left us clues, he whispered, to keep hope alive. In the days following his departure, the community discovered that Quetzalcoatl's teachings continued to reveal themselves in new ways. Mayahul noticed that the plants in the sacred garden were subtly changing, adapting to people's needs. Xochitl found new meanings in the old stories, as if each narrative were a living thing that grew over time. Quetzalcoatl's promise of return was not just a prophecy for the future, but a constant reminder that the divine was never truly absent. Every dawn brought new discoveries, every dusk new reflections. Humanity had learned not just to survive, but to evolve. The legacy of the feathered serpent lived on not just in the codices and rituals, but in the very essence of a civilization that flourished in the valley. Subsequent generations would continue to develop the arts, sciences, and philosophies he had introduced, always finding new meanings and applications for the ancestral teachings. And so, as Quetzalcoatl traveled east, his creation continued to grow and transform, proving that the true miracle was not just in the act of creation, but in the infinite capacity for evolution and renewal that had been planted in the heart of every human being.